Randall David Johnson. Perhaps no name in MLB history evokes more fear in the hearts of batters than that of a big unit. We all remember the mullet, the mustache, the scowl, the blazing fastball, the filthy slider, the 6'10" monster of a man that accomplished more after 35 than most players do in their entire career. But as legend melds into myth over the years, we can lose sight of what he truly managed to accomplish during his playing days. The absolute absurdity of his raw numbers, including nearly 5,000 strikeouts, 303 wins, and 5 Cy Young awards. We may remember the highlights, like the time he hit that bird, but we find ourselves forgetting the great stories, like the time he won Game 6 of the World Series against the Yankees, then came back the very next day and won Game 7 at age 38, or how Johnson went from a gangly near bust of a pitcher with the Montreal Expos in his mid-20s to perhaps the greatest left-handed pitcher of all time. Well, now it's time to jog our memory, to appreciate the glory of baseball's big unit. Step right up to the plate with us, if you dare. When Randy Johnson debuted with the Montreal Expos in 1988, he was already 25 years old, and he came with a lot of baggage. The California native was the son of a police officer who grew up throwing balls at his garage door until the nails came out of the wood. Young Randy was a two-sport star in high school and earned a scholarship to play basketball and baseball at USC, where he was a teammate of Mark McGwire. The 6'10" southpaw already had a high 90s fastball in college, but had trouble controlling it, often scaring the opposing teams with his lack of command. This tradition started early, and it wouldn't get any better for him after the Expos drafted Randy in the second round in 1985. He continued to struggle with his control, walking an astounding 128 batters at AA Jacksonville. In fact, the young hurler was so wild that while rehabbing from an injury, his pitching coach had to obtain a department store mannequin to stand in the batter's box while Johnson threw simulated games. His teammates were too afraid to do so. But his fastball wasn't all that he had trouble controlling. During a game with AAA Indianapolis in 1988, Johnson injured his pitching hand after trying to catch a ball smashed up the middle. Worried that his pitcher might have a broken knuckle or something, Johnson's manager removed him from the game. Randy was not happy about that, so what did the irate Johnson do? He threw a right-handed punch at the bat rack, breaking his non-pitching hand. It turned out that his pitching hand was fine, but the punch caused him to miss 2 months of that season. When Johnson finally debuted with the Expos in September of 1988, he immediately became the tallest player in Major League Baseball history up to that point, at 6'10". But that was about the only way he distinguished himself at first. His 98-mile-per-hour fastball and his hard, exploding slider were definitely big league pitches, but with no discernible control over them, he wasn't able to effectively retire big league batters consistently. He walked as many men as he struck out in 1989, before the Expos decided to deal him to the Mariners mid-season as part of a 5-player deal that landed them all-star left-hander Mark Langston. It was an understandable trade at the time, but one that Expos fans would later come to regret, much like the trade that sent another Hall of Famer, Pedro Martinez, to the Red Sox 10 years later in 1998. Yeah, that's right. In an alternate reality, the Expos had prime Johnson and Martinez in their rotation. Before he left the Expos, however, Johnson did earn something of note: his awesome nickname. While shagging batting practice, Randy collided head-on with his smaller Expos teammate, Tim Raines. Raines looked up at the much taller Johnson and remarked, "You're a big unit," and the name stuck. For the next 3.5 years with the Mariners, the big unit continued to struggle with his consistency, posting ERAs near 4 with nearly 150 walks a season, netting him ERA plus marks no greater than 108 in any of these seasons. For reference, an average ERA plus is 100. But Johnson did show flashes of utter dominance, like on June 2nd, 1990 at the Kingdome in Seattle. Versus the Tigers that night, Randy threw the first ever no-hitter in Mariners franchise history, striking out 8, although even this performance couldn't escape his control woes. He still walked 6. The man who would retire with 303 victories had just 48 by the age of 28, and by 1992, it looked like Randy Johnson might not be in the big leagues long enough to earn that many more. Tall pitchers who have bad command and rely almost solely on velocity don't generally age well after all. Then came some timely advice from another hard-throwing ace who knew a little something about control problems. It was August 1992. Randy Johnson was on his way to yet another 500 season with the Mariners, in which he led the league in walks. So, during a Mariners-Rangers series at the Kingdome, he decided to seek out the advice of a future Hall of Famer and fellow fireballer, Nolan Ryan. Ryan had been a late bloomer as well, one that had struggled with walks massively early in his career. He knew exactly what Johnson was going through. So, what did Ryan have to say? Well, for starters, he suggested that Johnson make a few adjustments to his mechanics, including landing on the ball of his right foot and not the heel as he strode towards the plate. This would keep his momentum going to home plate instead of third base, and hopefully improve his control. He also offered some much-needed words of encouragement to the big lefty. Later that season, in late September, the retooled big unit faced his mentor at Arlington Stadium in Texas. Johnson threw 160 pitches and struck out 18 Ranger hitters. He would never again be the same pitcher. Johnson also found some additional resolve that offseason from a more personal source. His father Bud had died from heart issues that Christmas while Randy was en route to the hospital. He never got to say goodbye to his father, and later said that from that day forward he realized that baseball was just a game. It wasn't life or death, and he resolved to be the best player he could be. And boy, was he ever good.
So Randy Johnson has it all going for him tonight.
In 1993, the new and improved Johnson went 19-8, leading the AL with 308 strikeouts and finishing second in the league's Cy Young voting. His ERA plus jumped almost 30 points all the way up to 135. On top of all of this, he managed to walk just 99 hitters, his first full season with less than 100 walks allowed. After a dominant strike-shortened 1994 season in which he K'd 208 in just 172 innings, the big unit had his best season to date in 1995, going 18-2 with 294 strikeouts, along with leading the league with a 2.48 ERA. This all culminated in his first and only AL Cy Young Award. Johnson also pitched the Mariners into and through the playoffs that year, beating the Angels 9-1 in a one-game playoff, before beating the Yankees in Game 3 of the divisional series, and returning in Game 5 to pitch 3 innings of relief as the Mariners won the game in 11 innings and the series. Johnson and the Mariners' magical season came to an end against the Indians in the ALCS, but the team, armed with their newly minted left-handed ace, were now bona fide perennial contenders in the AL. Flash forward to the 1993 All-Star Game at Camden Yards. The Phillies' left-handed slugger John Kruk comes up against Johnson in the top of the third inning, and the big unit lets go of a 98-mile-per-hour fastball that soars over Kruk's head. Kruk steps out, catches his breath, and steps back in, taking the fastball down the middle, then weakly waving at 2 more pitches before returning to the dugout as his bemused All-Star teammates look on. 4 years later, at the 1997 All-Star Game, Johnson's former Expos teammate Larry Walker comes to the plate and experiences a similar missile from Johnson. The fast-thinking Walker turns his helmet around and marches to the right-handed batter's box to take a pitch to the delight of everyone in the ballpark, aside from maybe Johnson, that is. Walker's AB ended a bit better for him, as he turned back around and took a walk, though not before registering another iconic highlight for the big unit. Another change of note during this time was Johnson's increasing usage of his nasty, and I do mean nasty, slider. He embarrassed many a hitter with his sweeping pitch, including Hall of Fame shortstop Barry Larkin, who once swung at one that went between his legs. Increasingly, Johnson could throw the exploding pitch for a strike in any count, too, which meant hitters could never dig in and sit on the fastball, even in fastball counts. That's pretty rough, when the fastball you can't sit on is over 100 miles per hour from a nearly sidearm slot. The only thing that could hold Johnson back by this point was injuries. Unfortunately, he missed most of the 1996 season after undergoing major back surgery, something that would irritate him at times for the rest of his career. But he returned once again to his all-star form in 1997, going 20-4 with 291 strikeouts and a personal best 2.28 ERA. Twice that season he struck out 19 batters in a game, and at the height of the steroid era. The Mariners won the American League West by 6 games that season, but were eliminated by the Baltimore Orioles in the ALDS, with Johnson losing both of his starts to another Hall of Famer, Mike Mussina. A pretty anticlimactic end to what amounted to a monumental season for the big unit. And so Johnson entered the last year of his Mariners contract in 1998. The team had just committed to long-term deals with his 2 other stars, Alex Rodriguez and Ken Griffey Jr., and the big unit was expecting a big payday as well. But he was now 34 years old, recently coming off major back surgery, and had lots of innings under his belt at this point. So, when Johnson got off to a slow start that season, the Mariners decided to pull the trigger on a trade instead of a long-term deal, sending him to the Astros for 3 players. This was, to put it mildly, a big mistake. The starting pitchers like Mike Hampton and Shane Reynolds already in tow, adding Johnson to the mix basically gave the Astros 3 #1 starters, and quickly made them the favorites in the National League. When the news of the Johnson trade broke, the Astros Hall of Fame first baseman Jeff Bagwell was in a bar with some teammates after a game in Pittsburgh, and he promptly bought a round of drinks for everyone in the house. Bagwell's enthusiasm was not misplaced. 2 days later, Johnson made his Houston debut against the Pirates, striking out 12 in his first start. He followed that with back-to-back complete game shutouts, and as the entire baseball world was enthralled with the home run race between Mark McGwire and Sammy Sosa that fall of '98, Johnson quietly and completely dominated the National League. He went 10-1 with an absurd 1.28 ERA in 11 starts, along with a ridiculous 3.22 ERA+, leading Houston to win their division by a comfortable 12.5 games. Randy's dominance continued into that postseason. He pitched 2 games in the NLDS against the Padres and posted a 1.93 ERA in them, but the Astros' bats went silent and he got virtually no run support and lost both games. The 102-win Astros were taken down by the Pods, who would go on to lose themselves to the Yankees in the Fall Classic. Now a free agent, and after his remarkable run in Houston, Johnson was again one of the most desirable players in the game. Still, at 35 years old, most in baseball honestly felt that the big unit's days were probably behind him, but Randy Johnson was just getting warmed up. In 1999, the Arizona Diamondbacks were just entering their second season in the league, and they were desperate to make a splash by signing a big-name free agent to the young squad. So they signed the aging Johnson to a 4-year, $52 million contract. That seemed like a lot of money to give to a pitcher in his late 30s at the time, especially for an expansion team, but the D-backs were eager to make a splash, and make a splash they did. During his 4-season run with Arizona, Johnson would win the NL Cy Young every single year, and reel off one of the best stretches by any pitcher in baseball history. Let's break it down. By 1999, Johnson had added a reliable two-seam fastball to his repertoire, a 91-mile-per-hour cousin to his 98-mile-per-hour four-seamer. He could throw it for strikes and use it to get right-handers out, down, and away. It also gave him a certified ground ball pitch. He would utilize his updated repertoire to great results in that first season in Arizona, leading the league in innings with 271, ERA plus at 184, ERA at 2.48, FIP at 2.76, and strikeouts with a mind-numbing 364. He helped transform an expansion team that won 65 games the year before into a 100-win juggernaut that lost an NL Division Series to the Mets. This wouldn't be the last time that Johnson would lead his D-backs into the playoffs, however. Johnson kicked off the 2000 season by having one of the most dominant months of any player in baseball history. Seriously, what he did in April 2000 is right up there with Sammy Sosa hitting 20 home runs in June 1998, or Orel Hershiser's scoreless September in 1988. In April 2000, Johnson went 6-0 with 64 strikeouts and a 0.91 ERA. He had 3 complete games and 2 shutouts, and was on the mound for his team for all but 15 outs in those starts. The big unit was 36, and though he often had to spend time between innings lying flat in a dugout runway to nurse his surgically repaired back, he was better than ever, going 19-7 with another 347 strikeouts, easily winning his 3rd career Cy Young. That September, Johnson struck out Mike Lowell of the Florida Marlins for his 3,000th strikeout. The Diamondbacks failed to make the playoffs, but added a key roster piece late in that season, veteran right-hander Curt Schilling. Schilling was the yin to Johnson's yang, relaxed, extroverted, and talkative, where Johnson was quiet, introverted, and surly. The two opposites attracted wins immediately, and would dominate the league in 2001 like almost no combo ever has. So let's get to it. 2001. First, Johnson had one of the oddest things ever happen to a major league player happen to him in a spring training game. This. That's right, a Johnson fastball struck a dove in mid-flight on the way to home plate. The umpires declared it a no pitch, while Giants second baseman Jeff Kent picked up the bird with his bare hands and took it back to the dugout. Aside from the circus plays, Johnson was making plenty of other memories in 2001 as well. On May 8th, he tied the major league record by striking out 20 Cincinnati Reds in a single game. Johnson and Randy Clemens remain the only pitchers to ever strike out 18 or more batters in a 9-inning game on 3 separate occasions. That 2001 season, Johnson struck out a personal best 372 batters, behind only Nolan Ryan and Sandy Koufax for the single-season record. More than 37% of the hitters that Johnson faced that year were set down on strikes, and he faced a ton of hitters, 994 to be exact, en route to pitching almost 250 innings. He had a 21-6 record with a 2.49 ERA, winning his 4th Cy Young Award. But most importantly, he and Curt Schilling, also a 20-game winner, led the Diamondbacks to a division crown and berth in the World Series against the New York Yankees. That's when things would truly get nuts for Randy. In Game 2 of the series, Johnson threw a 3-hit shutout. In Game 6, with the Diamondbacks trailing 3-2, Johnson won his second game with another solid outing. And then, in Game 7, with the Yankees taking a 2-1 lead into the 8th inning, Johnson came out in relief on 0 days rest and retired all 4 batters he faced to keep the game close. And so, when this happened, Johnson was the pitcher on the hook for the win, picking up his 3rd victory of the series. It was a magical championship for Arizona, and perhaps even more so for the big unit. Johnson followed this up with perhaps the best full season of his career in 2002, going 24-5 with a 2.32 ERA, 195 ERA plus, and his 5th straight 300K season, finishing with 334 punchies. He claimed baseball's pitching triple crown en route to his 4th straight Cy Young and 5th overall. In 2003, Johnson had arthroscopic surgery on his right knee, cutting off a season in which he struggled overall relative to his first 4 years in the desert, putting up an ERA in the 4s for the first time since 1989. He would massively rebound in 2004, however, again leading the league in strikeouts with 290 while winning 16 games with a 2.60 ERA. He also became, at 41, the oldest pitcher in baseball history to throw a perfect game during a May 18th matchup with Atlanta. Johnson struck out 13 Braves on this faithful day, with his 117th and final pitch being clocked at 98 miles per hour. After the 2004 season, the Diamondbacks decided to cut some salary, so they traded the now 42-year-old legend to the New York Yankees for 3 prospects. It was, somehow, his first time pitching for a big market team. Johnson won 17 games in 2005 and 2006 for the Yankees, who won the AL East both seasons. However, during this period, his ERA ballooned almost a full 2.5 runs from where it was with Arizona, all the way to exactly 5 at the end of his final season with the Yanks. During that offseason, Johnson had lower back surgery yet again, before being traded back to the Diamondbacks for 4 players in 2007. He made just 10 starts that season, thanks to more back surgery, putting up solid if unspectacular numbers in the games he did pitch, and then followed it up with an 11-10 season with a 3.91 ERA in 2008. He finished his career with the Giants the following season, notching his 300th career win in a game versus the Nationals. He was 45 years old at the time, and so a legendary career came to an end. 22 big league seasons, 303 wins, a 3.29 ERA, 5 Cy Youngs, a World Series championship, a 10-time All-Star, all while striking out 4,875 batters, second to only Nolan Ryan all time, and the most ever by a left-hander. In 2015, Johnson was elected to the National Baseball Hall of Fame in his first year of eligibility, getting the 3rd most votes ever cast. His run of dominance from 1992 to 2004 shouldn't be overlooked as well. During this period, he led the league in strikeouts every full season he pitched aside from one. The year he didn't was 1997, when Johnson struck out 291, finishing just 1K behind Roger Clemens. The last interesting and quite frankly scary stat I'll mention about Johnson is the fact that he hit 190 batters in his career, more than any pitcher in over a century. I guess it makes sense why all those batters were so terrified all those years. The 6'10" Johnson stuck out like a sore thumb when he first entered the big leagues at 25. By age 45, he stood out as a legend, a player of the sort we will likely never see again. When do you think we'll see another 41-year-old throw a perfect game? Or a pitcher notch 360 or more strikeouts in a season, 3 years in a row? Or win 4 consecutive Cy Youngs? Or win 3 separate games in one World Series? Or strike out almost 5,000 career batters? All of these reasons are why we here at MTC believe we can confidently say that there'll never be another Randy Johnson. He was the chosen one before LeBron or Bryce Harper. He was the natural. He was the kid. He was Ken Griffey Jr. He was the fastest player in history to hit 350 homers, which he did towards the end of the 1998 season, which is now better remembered as the year Mark McGwire battled Sammy Sosa to break Roger Maris's single-season record for homers. At the time, no one could really appreciate the layers of irony. While the nation cheered on 2 overly juiced cheaters, the player who didn't need the juice was poised to set the bar so high that the stink of steroids would be destined to fade away as the years wore on. Jr. was also the fastest to reach 400 homers, which he did when he was just 30 years old, 141 days. But here's another irony. That record eventually was broken by A-Rod, another juicer who would later be exposed. When Jr. launched his 400th bomb, he was still a young player who was probably capable of hitting 400 more before he was finished. But instead of aging with grace or steroid-infused oomph, Griffey aged like a mortal. Instead of 800, he finished with a still impressive 630 homers, 7th all time. His 83.8 WAR is 58th best all time. Yet, despite some of his longevity issues relative to his Hall of Fame peers, he got elected with a record 99.3% of the vote in 2016, which at the time was the highest in history. Jr.'s impact on the game had obviously transcended his numbers, which still ranked him among the best. He arguably had the sweetest swing in the history of the game after all, played some of the best defense ever in center field, and provided fans with legendary and iconic moments that will forever rank among the most treasured in the history of the game. That's why today we're going to be exploring the career of the kid, and in doing so, proving why there will never be another Ken Griffey Jr. Studies have shown that being the son of a major league player gives you a big leg up in becoming a big leaguer yourself. After all, more than 2% of the players who debuted in the 2010s were the progeny of big leaguers. While it's easy to scream genetics to explain these numbers, researchers aren't so quick to agree. If you look at Ken Griffey Sr. and then at Jr., you see the similarities. Both were left-handed and had very smooth swings. Both were fast and athletic, with lots of obvious fast-twitch muscle. But if you want to understand how the sons of big leaguers succeed, think about Jr.'s high school career. Ken attended one of the great sports high schools in the country, Archbishop Moeller in Cincinnati, long known for being a football powerhouse. They weren't too shabby in baseball either, producing 17 high school All-Americans, including future Hall of Famer Barry Larkin and MLB mainstay Buddy Bell, both who went on to register over 2,500 big league hits. But Griffey Jr. played just 2 seasons for Moeller, his junior and senior years. The reason? He wanted to spend spring training with his father in Tampa when he played for the Yankees. Jr. would then play baseball in the summer back in Ohio, followed by starring at wide receiver on the school football team, even going on to get offers from elite schools like Oklahoma. During his 2 years at Moeller, Griffey hit 17 homers with a batting average of .478. Many of the fields lacked fences, and often opposing teams would have to line up their outfielders behind the light poles. Didn't matter. Scouts saw Junior hit baseballs in excess of 400 feet, with a swing that seemed to be dropped from the hands of the baseball gods themselves. However, it was the Seattle Mariners who had the first pick in the 1987 draft, and they weren't sold on taking yet another high schooler in the first round, much less with the first overall pick. They'd been burned when their 1986 selection, Pat Lennon, had flamed out. Worst, the M's gave their draft picks a psychological test to predict future behavior and character, and Griffey's results were the worst they'd ever seen. It was later revealed that it was Ken's younger brother who had taken the test, as the older Griffey hadn't appreciated the importance of it, but still. Since Griffey wanted to be taken number 1, he agreed to take the test again, this time personally, and his score came back about average. Furthermore, to cement the deal, Griffey agreed to sign for $160,000, tens of thousands of dollars less than he could have gotten, telling his agent that he'd end up making it up on the back end. However, he almost didn't end up making it at all. What Junior was best known for, beyond his otherworldly talent of course, was the pure joy with which he played the game. Hat on backwards, a 1,000-watt smile, ball sent into the stratosphere, Ken Griffey Jr. seemed to be the last person who'd ever deal with thoughts of self-harm. But, as he explained, it seemed like everybody was yelling at me in baseball. Then I came home, and everyone was yelling at me there. I got depressed, I got angry, I just didn't want to live. Junior was still 17 when he started his professional career, and it wasn't a smooth transition. There were incidents involving the sons of bus drivers who got into it with Griffey, and then when he returned home to Ohio, he'd stay out all night and worry his mother. His father suggested he find his own place to live. The conflicts became too much for Junior, and in 1988, he swallowed 277 aspirins and wound up in the ICU. Even there, father and son continued to battle. When Junior was released, he did end up finding his own place to live. On the field, however, Griffey continued to star. He spent 58 games at High A, hitting .338 with 11 homers and 42 RBIs. That got him promoted to Double A for the last 17 games he'd play in the minors. He was 18 years old, and at least physically, ready for the show. Best season by a teenager in MLB history belongs to Bryce Harper, who put up a 5.2 WAR during the 2012 season, including 57 extra base hits that remains a record for MLB teenagers. Next comes Mel Ott with his age 19 season that saw him post a WAR of 3.9. Third best is Griffey Jr., who posted a WAR of 3.3 in 1989. Even with service time manipulation, it's hard to see how the M's could have left Jr. off the team coming out of spring training. In Arizona, he'd gotten hit in 15 straight games, leading to a batting average of .358. He also drove in 20 runs on 32 total knocks. He immediately became the M's starting center fielder. When he stepped on the field for his debut, history was made, because for the first time in the annals of MLB, a father and son were both playing at the same time, though not on the same team. Yet. He hit a double against Dave Stewart in his first big league at-bat, and a week later, he hit his first bomb. A month later, a candy company debuted the Ken Griffey Jr. chocolate bar, and quickly, 1 million of them were sold, but not one of Jr. himself, who ironically enough is allergic to chocolate. Case in point, Jr. was cruising to AL Rookie of the Year. By late July, he was hitting a solid .287 with 13 homers and 45 ribbies, but then he broke his hand on a road trip to Chicago. At first it was reported that Jr. had slipped coming out of the shower. That obviously wouldn't have been a big deal, but it ended up being revealed that he'd broken it when he slammed it against the wall while arguing with his girlfriend. Jr. obviously still had some growing up to do. He's the only player I've ever dealt with where I'd have to call his mother on him, said Mariners GM Woody Woodward. Griffey missed a month, then came back with a bit of a whimper, hitting just 3 more homers, while his final average sank to .264, causing Jr. to finish third in Rookie of the Year voting. However, the stage was still set for his propulsion into the stratosphere of baseball's truly elite all-time greats. The talent was there, but first, there'd be something a bit more local in terms of history for Jr. When the 1990 season started, Ken Griffey Sr. was 40 years old and playing for his original team, the Cincinnati Reds. He wasn't playing very well, however. In the same time period, his son was becoming a human highlight reel. Jr.'s numbers at the plate were strong. He finished the year with a .300 average, 22 homers, and 80 RBI. He'd make his first All-Star team and win his first Gold Glove. The 5-tool prodigy was putting on a display nightly, like when he robbed Jesse Barfield of a home run in Yankee Stadium, using the wall to spring himself up. Watching that play was his father, who was sitting next to Barfield's wife. Little did Sr. know at the time that he'd be on the same team as his son within 4 months. When the Reds released Sr. in August, the M's picked him up largely to keep an eye on Jr. On August 31st, they became the first father-son duo to play in a game on the same team, then the first to get back-to-back hits. Then, on September 14th, they eclipsed a factoid that seemed semi-impossible. They hit back-to-back homers, a feat that will more than likely never be matched in MLB history. Sr. hit his first, and later he said, "I knew Jr. would be thinking home run. I could see in his eyes when I crossed the plate." They would end up playing 21 games together that season, and Sr. got a big boost from the experience, putting up a batting average of .377 and 18 ribbies with the M's. But he did successfully help Jr. too. A clubhouse aide was later quoted as saying, "Jr. toned down when Sr. got there. He went from a brash and outspoken kid to someone more respectful of his elders." 1991 would be the only season that they would play together from start to finish. The impending retirement of his father, however, seemed to be weighing Jr. down a bit. His numbers were good. He'd end up finishing the year with a .327 average to go with 22 homers and 100 RBIs, but he was now getting criticized for his sometimes indifferent different play, especially in the outfield, despite the fact that he had the talent to be among the best ever to play center. To some, like teammate Harold Reynolds, it just didn't seem like he was having fun. So the two talked, and Junior came out in the second half on fire, hitting .373 with 13 homers and 64 RBIs over the season's final stretch. He'd come to finish the year with a WAR of 7.1, third best for position players overall, but the best was still yet to come for the kid. During the 1990s, the player with best WAR overall was a mostly clean Barry Bonds with a mark of 80.2. Second, though, was Ken Griffey Jr. with a total of 67.5. During the decade, Griffey hit more homers and drove in more runs than Bonds. He also had better defensive numbers, including 1995 when Jr. led all of baseball with a D-WAR of 3.4. They were both superstars, Bonds and Griffey, both the children of standout MLB players who'd grown up around the game, but there was a huge difference between them. As the long ball became the face of MLB in the late 1990s, Bonds was seemingly moving past his prime, and Jr. was entering his. This is obviously before Bonds started his special diet, reversing this trend completely, but regardless, the natural was quickly becoming the face of the MLB because of the awe-inspiring things he could do on the baseball field, things no one else could, with an electricity that complemented them perfectly. He could make defensive plays that rank among the best ever, still to this day, that have been shown over and over millions of times, winning 10 straight Gold Gloves in the process. For example, in 1995, he made this incredible Spider-Man catch by robbing Kevin Bass in the Kingdome, a play that defies belief even to this day. Unfortunately, this catch ended up resulting in a broken left wrist and 73 missed games, but like we said before, it still does live on. He could also do things like rob hitters of home runs with athletic maneuvers of all-time quality, such as this gem when he took away a bomb by Luis Gonzalez at Tiger Stadium in 1998. Perhaps known in MLB history, made as many ballet-like catches at the wall, plays where timing, speed, leaping ability, and lack of fear all combined to create an unfathomable burst of athleticism. During his prime, Jr. made these low-probability catches seem routine. Even though he might not have stolen the most bases, Griffey could still win games with his legs, like when he scored from first in the 1995 ALDS against the Yankees. But even before that play, Griffey had been tormenting the Bombers for months, starting in August when he returned from a broken wrist. The M's were in the middle of a race for the wild card, and they trailed the Yankees 7-6 in the bottom of the ninth, and then blasted a homer off closer John Wetland to win it for Seattle. The team went on a tear and won the division, setting up a slugfest in the ALDS against the Yankees. Griffey tied a record with 5 homers, all of them in key moments. He broke a tie in Game 4 with the homer, and then hit another in Game 5 to bring the M's within 1. But he won Game 5 because he could score from first on a double, which a lot of players can do, except for the fact that Edgar Martinez had hit that double to left, which is much harder to do. And it was the bottom of the ninth, and the M's were trailing by a run. If Griffey didn't score, the M's season would have probably been over. So, of course he scored. His defense, his speed, and his bat. It's almost as if you could close your eyes and point your finger to any of Junior's season hitting totals between 1993 and 2000, and you find something astounding, superhuman, otherworldly, especially in an era when guys were juicing and he wasn't. For example, in 1993, Griffey tied an MLB record by homering in 8 straight games. It wasn't like he did it with no one watching either. The entire sports ecosystem was glued to his every AB, and in the 9th game, he went 2 for 4 with a double, and the streak ended. Junior's response? That he really wasn't paying attention. He was just trying to use the whole field. No one should have been surprised. Before the streak began, during the 1993 Home Run Derby in Baltimore, Jr. had become the first player to hit the warehouse in right field during a game or BP. He was then just 23 years old, the age in which many players first break in. He was primed in 1994 to set records, specifically Roger Maris's hollowed mark of 61 AL homers. Jr. checked all the boxes. On June 17th, he'd hit his 30th, tying Babe Ruth for the most homers before July 1st. He then went on to hit 2 more to set the record. On August 11th, Jr. was sitting on 40 homers, easily within striking distance of Maris. But, speaking of strikes, the players had one in 1994, costing Griffey a shot at immortality, and the Montreal Expos a shot at a pennant, but that's a story for another day. Regardless, it still showed what a more mature Jr. was capable of. It was in 1997 that Jr. would take another shot at the record, finishing with 56 homers and 147 RBIs, winning his one and only MVP award. The following year, even though he led all of baseball with a WAR of 9.7, he'd finish 4th. Admittedly, this was before the advent of data-driven analysis, so one would think the outcome would probably be different now. But still, it's a race that probably didn't age that well. It was in the summer of 1998 that McGwire and Sosa postured themselves as feel-good stories, while they injected and ingested whatever they could do to boost their performance. However, what was kind of lost at the time was that Jr. stayed relatively close to them the entire season, with an identical home run total to his previous year at 56. Jr. clubbed another 48 homers the next year to lead the AL for the 3rd straight season. However, this time, he'd finished 10th in MVP voting, but things were soon to change drastically for Jr. In the offseason, he turned down the M's offer of 8 years, $135 million. He was set to be traded elsewhere by the turn of the century. His new home? Cincinnati. The deal was complete before the 2000 season, and at the age of 30, Jr. returned home to the team that his dad had first made a name with. Until then, Jr.'s baseball career had been one mostly of triumphs. He was universally admired, and he was poised to become the greatest home run hitter of all time, just as news reports were starting to surface about medicines that Mark McGwire kept in his locker in St. Louis. And this pathway wasn't immediately diverted from. Jr. played 145 games and hit 40 homers with 118 RBI in 2000, his first year in red. But unfortunately, that would end up being the high water mark for his Cincy stint. This was when Jr.'s body started breaking down. So, what happened exactly? Let's list off some of the major procedures he had to go through. Right shoulder surgery, right knee surgery, left knee surgery again, hamstring surgery, and 5 or 6 drainage procedures after the hamstring thing. During his first 4 years in Ohio, he played in about 58% of his team's games. But unfortunately, this wasn't the full extent of his injury woes. In 2002, he played in just 70 games, right? But that was with a torn patella in his right knee in almost all of the contests. In 2003, he dislocated his right shoulder, and then, for good measure, he ruptured an ankle tendon rounding first on a double and missed the rest of the year. In 2004, he tore that surgically repaired hamstring making a diving catch, and again missed the rest of the season. On and on it went. But he won the Comeback Player of the Year in 2005 by crushing 35 homers and driving in 92. He hit another 30 in 2007. By then, the team had moved him to right due to his quickly diminishing range and speed. But still, his numbers had been a ghost of what they once had been. In his time in Cincy, the kid had hit just 210 home runs in 9 years, a far cry from his total of 398 and 11 for Seattle. Fans were now voicing displeasure with his infrequent play, and the fact that the Reds were finishing sub 500 every year of Griffey's tenure. It was obviously time for a change. So he was traded to the White Sox in 2008, which he could have vetoed, but didn't, because the Sox were headed to the postseason, something he hadn't reached much in his career. Sadly, he didn't perform all that well, and they quickly got swept by the Rays. He signed with the Mariners in 2009 and went on to hit 19 home runs, but by 2010, he was done. In June, he literally packed up and drove cross-country to Florida. He was finished with baseball at the age of 40. But before he left, he gave baseball and America one last gift: Jackie Robinson Day. It was Griffey's idea to wear 42 on the day Jackie broke the color barrier, which has now grown to become a cherished April ritual. Griffey was the source of joy. Plain and simple, he was who he was and never apologized for it. He was and is a great ambassador of the game. He played hard, to the point that his body literally tapped out, not before registering back-to-back 50 homer seasons, an MVP, and 10 gold gloves. Just look at that Spider-Man catch again. This is a man of 6'3" and 200 pounds throwing his body at a wall at top speed with zero regards for his body. Then he could go out and hit a 450-foot homer, followed by a prank in the dugout. At the end of the day, Ken Griffey Jr. embodied all that is right in the sport of baseball, and it's for that reason, and all the ones we've mentioned so far, as well as so many more we could ever put into one vid, that we here at MTC believe there'll never be another player quite like Ken Griffey Jr. There has never been a pitcher quite like Lynn Nolan Ryan Jr. For starters, the man often called the Ryan Express struck out 5,714 batters in his remarkable career. Let's put that into perspective. First, that's about 17% more than the number 2 pitcher all time, Randy Johnson. Or, to put it another way, if a modern-day ace like Jacob deGrom were to strike out 255 hitters in a season, as deGrom did in his last full season in 2019, it would take 22 straight campaigns to get to Nolan Ryan territory. And even then, he would still be 104 strikeouts short of Ryan's record. In other words, no one's even close. And more than likely, nobody's ever going to get close. And not only did Ryan strike out more batters than any hurler ever has, he threw more no-hitters, pitched more innings, threw more pitches, and through it all, Ryan never gave in to a hitter, never took a pitch off. Even down in the count, he was still trying to throw unhittable offerings, results be damned. He wanted to strike out every batter he ever faced and make them look bad while doing it. And with the triple-digit fastball, sick curve, and fading changeup added late in his career, it wasn't very hard. Thanks to his ferocity, the typical Nolan Ryan game featured lots of strikeouts, lots of walks, and very few hits. Ryan not only struck out the most hitters ever, he walked the most, 2,795 in his career to be exact, more than 50% more than Steve Carlton, the next player on the list. The Ryan Express also threw the second most wild pitches and hit 158 batters during his career. He even walked more than 100 batters in a season 11 times, though some could argue that this lack of control only served to intimidate hitters all the more. The game has simply never seen anyone like Nolan Ryan. After he threw his record 7th no-hitter at the age of 44, Jim Reeves, a sports writer with the Fort Worth Star-Telegram, remarked, "Somewhere in another league where the cheering never stops and the beer is icy cold, Babe Ruth and Lou Gehrig and Ty Cobb and, yes, Shoeless Joe too, are waiting for their starting pitcher to arrive so the game can start." Young Nolan Ryan grew up in Alvin, Texas, near Houston. He strengthened his arm as a boy the old-fashioned way, throwing newspapers. Starting at age 8, Nolan woke up early every morning to help his father deliver the Houston Post. Throwing hundreds of papers before sunrise not only bolstered his arm strength, it developed a rigorous work ethic that would never leave him. Nolan's arm became the stuff of legend in Alvin very quickly. In junior high, he could stand on the goal line of the football field and chuck a softball into the other end zone. In high school, he became a feared pitcher on the mound, and I do mean feared. In one game, he hit the leadoff batter in the head, cracking his batting helmet. He then proceeded to break the next batter's arm with an offering. The guy who's due up next understandably refused to get into the batter's box at first. When he finally did, Ryan struck him out on 3 pitches. Ryan was still very much a work in progress and did not land on many Major League Scouts' radars. The Mets took him in the 12th round of the draft in 1965 with the 295th pick. That's right, 294 players were taken before Nolan Ryan. The following year, Nolan made quick work of the Appalachian League, mowing down 313 total hitters and 3 minor league stops before being called up to make his major league debut at Shea Stadium in September, at the ripe old age of 19. Ryan did not get a chance to become a rotation starter for the Mets until 1968. In his first start that April, he got his first win, throwing 6 2/3 shutout innings. Ryan went just 6-9 that season, but the rookie's fastball was already catching the attention of National League hitters, and some of the best at that. League MVP Orlando Cepeda observed, "Nolan Ryan is the best young pitcher I've ever seen in the major leagues." In 1969, both Nolan Ryan and the Miracle Mets landed on the national front page. Ryan made his first World Series appearance, helping the improbable Mets beat the favorite Baltimore Orioles. Ryan stepped up in a pivotal Game 3, throwing 2 1/3 scoreless innings in relief. That season would remarkably be the only World Series appearance of his entire big league career. At least it did end in a win. The following 2 seasons with the Mets, Ryan was a solid starter, striking out nearly a batter an inning, but still had major control problems. By the end of his 1971 campaign, Ryan, now 24, had not become the young phenom that many had anticipated. His career record, something that mattered more at the time, stood at an abysmal 29-38, and he was averaging around 6 walks per game. His ERA+, a metric used to measure how good a pitcher is relative to their peers, routinely sat around 100, or league average territory. Ryan was not happy, and was ready to give up baseball entirely rather than continue playing for the Mets. He told his wife Ruth that if New York did not trade him that offseason, he would quit entirely. So, thank goodness the Mets did end up trading him to the California Angels that December, along with 3 other players for shortstop Jim Fregosi, in what ended up being one of the most lopsided deals in big league history. Over the next few seasons in California, Ryan would reel off some of the most insane numbers a pitcher has ever compiled. It all started because the Angels, unlike the Mets, worked to help develop Ryan's potential. Pitching coach Tom Morgan helped Ryan overhaul his delivery. With his new, higher leg kick and insane stride length, Ryan felt like he was right on top of opposing hitters before he even let go of the pitch. It made his 100-mile-per-hour fastball look even faster than it already was. He also learned to throw his wicked curveball more consistently, helping him to keep hitters guessing. Ryan also started a weight training program that he would continue for the rest of his career. In the early 1970s, most baseball players did not lift weights, especially pitchers. Muscle mass was considered a liability, one that would kill flexibility and arm movement in pitchers. Ryan helped prove these outdated beliefs were wrong entirely. In 1972, his first year as an Angel, Ryan won 19 games and struck out a jaw-dropping 329 batters. He might have won 30 games if the Angels could have scored him some runs, something that would become a consistent theme during his time in California. 6 times that season, Ryan allowed 2 runs or less, but lost because the Angels got shut out. "I feel like I have to pitch a shutout every night or lose," the blunt Ryan told the press. "If I throw one bad pitch, I'll be beaten." He was basically Jacob deGrom before Jacob deGrom. Nolan Ryan was even better in 1973, enjoying one of the most dominant seasons by a pitcher in baseball history. He won 21 games, had a 2.87 ERA, and broke Sandy Koufax's single-season mark by striking out a mind-numbing 383 hitters. I'll say that again, 383 strikeouts. Somehow, he finished second in the Cy Young voting to Jim Palmer, who had a better winning percentage but more than 200 fewer strikeouts. Was Koufax-esque, at least in terms of his raw power. Ryan threw 4 no-hitters as an Angel to tie Koufax's career record, and he had not 1, not 2, but 5 300 strikeout seasons. He averaged more than 7 innings per start. His fastball was timed at a record 100.9 miles per hour one night, which was probably an underestimate, but still, this stood as the official world record for years. On days when it was Ryan's turn to pitch, opposing hitters had a tendency to ask out of the lineup, a disease that came to be known as Ryanitis. This dominance was juxtaposed by a ton of walks. walks, often over 150, sometimes even climbing into the 200s a season, but overall, he was universally considered baseball's most dominant pitcher, and hitters could not stop themselves from raving about Ryan's devastating stuff. Slugger Oscar Gamble said that a good game against Ryan was going 0-for-4 and not getting hit in the head. Hall of Famer Reggie Jackson said, "You don't face Ryan without your rest. He's the only guy I go against that makes me go to bed before midnight." Two-time MVP Dale Murphy said, "He is the only pitcher you start thinking about 2 days before you face him." Dave Duncan, who would later become a successful pitching coach with the A's and Cardinals, perhaps put it best. "A guy like Ryan," he said, "doesn't just get you out, he embarrasses you. There are times when you feel like you've won some sort of victory by just making contact with the ball." When Ryan was on, hitters had no chance. Once, when Ryan was one out from one of his no-hitters, Detroit Tigers slugger Norm Cash walked up to the plate, not with the bat, but with a wooden table leg that had been ripped off a table in the Tiger clubhouse. "Check his bat," Ryan shouted from the mound at the home plate umpire, who, after a good laugh, asked Cash to grab a real bat. Cash responded, "Why? I'm not going to get a hit anyway," and he didn't. Cash got a real bat, popped up, and Ryan had his no-hitter. Ryan was a workhorse as few have ever been on the mound. His pitch counts were obscene and would get a manager fired today. In a June 1974 ball game against the Red Sox, Ryan threw 13 innings with 19 strikeouts and 10 walks. He faced 58 Red Sox hitters. Today's pitchers rarely face 30 batters in a ball game. In 4 of his first 5 seasons with the Angels, Ryan threw more than 280 innings. By 1979, the 32-year-old Ryan still had good stuff. He went 16-14 and struck out 223 batters, but the Angels felt like his best years were behind him, with their GM famously remarking that Nolan Ryan can be replaced by 2 8-7 pitchers. Big mistake. As it turned out, Nolan Ryan was just getting warmed up. The Ryan Express wasn't even halfway done with his big league career, and many of his greatest moments were still to come, and back in his home state of Texas. After signing one of the biggest deals in the early history of free agency, Nolan Ryan fulfilled a lifelong dream by returning to pitch for his hometown Houston Astros. As an Astro, he continued to mow down hitters and surpass pitching milestones. In July 1980, he recorded his 3,000th career strikeout. The following season, he no-hit none other than the powerhouse Los Angeles Dodgers, who would later win the World Series. It was his 5th career no-hitter, breaking another Koufax record. Ryan finished the strike-shortened season of 1981 with a minuscule 1.69 ERA and a ridiculous 1.95 ERA+, the highest of his career. Then, at the start of the 1983 season, Ryan broke Walter Johnson's career strikeout record of 3,509, a number that had been on the books since 1927. Strikeout number 4,000 came in 1985, and the Ryan Express just kept on chugging. After all, he was only 38 at the time, an age pretty old for some pitchers, but practically a spring chicken for the rough and tumble righty. In 1987, Ryan led the National League in ERA and strikeouts, but thanks to a lack of run support, went 8-16. He finished 5th in Cy Young voting despite an extreme bias towards winning percentage at the time. His 1.42 ERA+ also led the league and registered as the highest mark in a full season in his career. Thanks to his workout regimen, Ryan maintained a body that was stronger and fitter than most of his younger peers. He led the league in strikeouts again in 1988 as a 41-year-old. Yet Houston, like the Angels, decided he was getting too old and decided the veteran needed a pay cut. Ryan decided he needed a change of scenery and more money, and moved up the road to Arlington to join the Texas Rangers. Amazingly, the Ryan Express just kept on chugging into his mid-40s. In his first season with the Rangers, Ryan struck out a league-leading 301 hitters, the 6th time he had hit the 300 strikeout mark in his career. That August, he also posted career strikeout number 5,000. The following season in 1990, as a 43-year-old, Ryan pitched his 6th career no-hitter, beating the defending world champion Oakland A's. He did so despite constant pain in his lower back that later turned out to be a stress fracture. "It wasn't all that bad," Ryan observed after the game. "It only hurt when I threw the ball." That same season, Ryan returned to the mound and won his 300th game against the Brewers. Then, in May 1991, the 44-year-old Ryan took the mound against Toronto, the best hitting team in the American League. In an epic performance, he shut down the Blue Jays, notching his mind-boggling 7th career no-hitter, a number that will almost certainly never be equaled. Finally, the 46-year-old Ryan's body started to break down, with 1993 proving to be his final campaign with the Rangers and of his 27 MLB seasons. However, Ryan still had some surprises up his sleeve, including one last intimidating moment, one that to this day still lives on as perhaps the most viral moment of his entire career. It was a hot August day in Texas, and Robin Ventura, the White Sox 26-year-old all-star third baseman, strode to the plate against the then 46-year-old Ryan. He'd already singled against Ryan earlier. Nolan proceeded to bring the heat up and in, beating young Robin. Ventura dropped his bat, tossed his helmet, and charged the mound. Ryan proceeded to hog-tie the young whippersnapper and hammered him with a volley of noogie punches to the head in what was later called the Texas haircut. A badass moment for a truly badass pitcher, encapsulating the final years of his MLB tenure succinctly, beating on much younger players, embarrassing them constantly in the process. Ryan's last career start was September 22, 1993 in Seattle. In the first inning, Ryan felt something pop. It was the ulnar collateral ligament in his right elbow. "There's no way I'll ever be able to throw again," he said after the game. "My body is telling me it's time to move on and do something else." Several pitchers in the history of the game have dominated their opponents as well as Nolan Ryan in his prime, but no other lasted as long as Ryan did. Thanks to his pioneering exercise regimen and truly remarkable natural gifts, Ryan sustained a 27-year career that will more than likely never be equaled. He was quiet, he was tough, and he was disciplined. He didn't smoke, didn't do anything reckless in the off-season, married his high school sweetheart, and celebrated his no-hitters with orange juice instead of champagne. And despite some erratic early seasons, Ryan rebounded to post some of the most impressive stats in the history of the major leagues. 5,714 career strikeouts, 5,386 innings pitched, 324 wins, and 6.6 hits per nine, with some perhaps equally impressive negative numbers as well, including 2,795 walks, 4.7 walks per nine, and 277 wild pitches. Oh yeah, and he also threw 7 no-hitters, and 6 300-plus strikeout seasons, all while pitching until he was nearly 50. That's why we here at MTC believe we can confidently say that there will never be another Nolan Ryan. Baseball legend Rickey Henderson liked to refer to himself in the third person, but in 1991, after he stole his 939th career base, breaking Lou Brock's all-time record, he decided to, instead, go with the more conventional approach, and he made no attempt to downplay his own achievement.
Today, I'm the greatest of all time. Thank you.
Some might find this statement boastful, cocky, or even disrespectful. Others would say it's just Rickey being Rickey, but that doesn't mean he was wrong. Rickey was unquestionably the greatest base stealer of all time. It's not even close. On the base paths, Rickey had a combination of speed, instincts, and intelligence that no other player has ever had. Not Lou Brock, not Ty Cobb, not Jackie Robinson. They called him the Man of Steel, and his 1,406 stolen bases will likely never even be sniffed by another big league ball player, unless they outlaw pickup throws entirely, and probably not even then. But Rickey wasn't just a threat on the base paths. He was the greatest leadoff hitter in baseball for the majority of his career, and arguably in history. He drew walks at an all-time rate, hit more leadoff home runs than anyone, and even threw in some solid defense. And no one in Major League Baseball history has ever scored more runs than Rickey Henderson. No one. Rickey was unlike anyone else in the game. He was weird, and fun, and cocky, a terror to opposing pitchers and catchers, and unquestionably one of the greatest showmen on earth. And he would probably be the first one to tell you that. Rickey Henderson spent most of his childhood in the city where he would spend most of his career, Oakland, California. Rickey excelled in many sports, including baseball and football. When the baseball coach at his high school, a converted driving instructor, assigned the 15-year-old Rickey to the JV team without even a tryout, Rickey went up to him and said, "You must not know who I am." And later, just like a scene from a movie, Rickey showed exactly who he was. He snuck into the varsity team's batting practice and put on a show, launching rockets across the diamond. When he was finished, the coach looked at him and said, You come with us." And from there, Rickey was off to the races. The Oakland A's drafted the young star in the 4th round of the 1976 draft, and he quickly moved to the minors. In a preview of what was to come, Henderson hit .345, walked 104 times, scored 120 runs, and stole 95 bases at Single-A Modesto. By 1979, he was in the majors, going 2 for 4 against Texas with a double and a stolen base in his major league debut. Rickey led the team that year with 33 stolen bases despite playing in only 89 games. The A's weren't good, winning just 54 contests, but Henderson proved he could be electric on baseball's biggest stage, and he kept proving it over and over again. Former Yankees legend Billy Martin took over the reins in Oakland in 1980, and the club's fortunes quickly improved. Martin preached an aggressive style of play, which became known as Billy Ball. It was a style made for Rickey Henderson. In his first full season in the big leagues, Rickey put on a dazzling show of speed and overall ability. He led the league in stolen bases with a jaw-dropping even 100, the start of a prolonged assault on the record books. It was the first of 7 straight seasons in which he would lead the league in steals. Ricky's approach to the craft of stealing a base was different than most elite base swipers. They would study a pitcher's move to first base, but Henderson focused solely on the pitcher's move to home plate. He felt he could get the best jump if he could accurately detect when a pitcher was going to go home, and if they picked him off sometimes because of his own misjudgment, so what? He had the speed to beat even some of those plays. But Ricky didn't just steal bases. He finished second in the league in walks with 117, third in on-base percentage at 420, while hitting .303 with a 135 OPS+. He was chosen to play in the first of his 10 All-Star games. The A's won 83 games and finished second in the AL West. The following season, 1981, was interrupted by a player's strike, but Ricky just kept on running, stealing 56 bases in 108 games. He hit .319, won his first and only Gold Glove award, and finished second in AL MVP voting. The A's won the West but were swept by the Yankees in the ALCS. The A's fell back down to earth in 1982, but Ricky himself reached new heights. He led the majors in walks and set a new major league record with 130 stolen bases. It shattered the previous mark of 118 set by Lou Brock in 1974. Ricky became one of the biggest draws in baseball, and Ricky the Showman gave fans exactly what they wanted, swiping bags seemingly at will, making tough running catches, then beating his chest. He was an absolute force of nature. The A's fired Billy Martin at the end of the 1982 season, but this had little effect on Ricky in 1983. He stole a league-leading 108 bases, again led the league in walks with 103, and posted the best full-season OPS plus of his career with a 139 mark. If Ricky got on first base, which he was doing every year at an over 400 clip, everyone in the ballpark knew he was running. Red Sox first baseman Mo Vaughn called Ricky by the nickname Gas, because walking him was like pouring gasoline on a fire. When Ricky got to first base, Vaughn would say, "What's up, Gas? You going?" Ricky would smile and say, "You know I am," and then he was gone. And then, just like that, at the end of the 1984 season, Ricky was gone from Oakland too. The A's received 5 players from the New York Yankees: Stan Javier, Jose Rijo, Eric Plunk, which is an elite name for a ball player, Tim Bertstaz, and Jay Howell, in return for Henderson and pitcher Burt Bradley. He had a great year in 1984, establishing his career high in OPS plus at 146 while crushing 16 dingers and swiping 66 bases. It might not have been the mind-boggling steals total of previous years, but it still led the league. And now, going to New York was giving him a chance to reunite with manager Billy Martin and cash in with an $8.6 million deal over 5 years. Moving from the West Coast to the East didn't affect Ricky's game in the slightest. He again led the AL in swiped bags with 80 in 1985 and 87 in 1986. He also led the AL in runs scored both of those seasons. But Ricky didn't stop there. He added a new element to his game and some muscle to his frame. Now, he was a bona fide power threat. Henderson proceeded to slug 24 home runs in 1985 and 28 in 1986, while posting a slugging percentage of nearly 500 cumulatively. He hit 9 of those home runs in 1986 to lead off the game. Soon, the leadoff jack was something that Ricky became known for, just like his quote snap catches and ludicrous stolen base totals. Over his career, he would hit 81 leadoff dingers, far more than the next closest player, Alfonso Soriano, who hit 54. Even more remarkable was the fact that Henderson hit leadoff home runs for all 9 different teams he played for in his 25-year career, and he hit at least 1 leadoff blast in every season, including one at the age of 44 in 2003. By hitting leadoff blasts and turning walks into doubles, Henderson was cementing himself as the greatest leadoff hitter in modern history, but his time in New York was coming to a close. Henderson was sidelined for 67 games in 1987 with a hamstring injury. He still managed to swipe 41 bases, but the Yankees struggled, falling to 4th place in the AL East after 2 second-place finishes in Henderson's first 2 seasons. Lou Piniella, who had replaced Billy Martin that year, questioned Henderson's commitment to the team, and Henderson's relationship with the brass suffered correspondingly. He had gotten the reputation as a cocky player who could put up big numbers for himself but couldn't really help his team win ball games, whatever that meant. Healthy again in 1988, Ricky tried to prove his naysayers wrong, and he mostly succeeded. While his power dipped as his slugging went back down to the 300s, he still hit .305 and stole 93 bases, his highest total since 1983. But the Yankees dropped to 5th place. When he was finally traded back to Oakland in 1989, Henderson, despite the numbers, still had a lot to prove in his hometown. Ricky returned to an A's team that was the defending American League champs. This was a squad that had the Bash brothers, Jose Canseco and Mark McGwire, and seasoned veterans like Dave Henderson, Carney Langsford, Bob Welch, and Dennis Eckersley. They had lost to the Dodgers in the previous World Series thanks to a disappointing performance and a little magic by Kirk Gibson. But in 1989, the team was dominant, and with Ricky Henderson inserted mid-season at the top of the order, they looked unstoppable. For his part, he notched a 148 OPS plus with 52 stolen bases in just 85 games with the team. Oakland won the AL West by 7 games. Then they destroyed the Blue Jays in 5 games in the ALCS. Ricky hit .400 with 2 home runs, 5 RBIs, 8 runs, 7 walks, and 8 steals in that series, and was named MVP. Ricky had now proven he could dominate in the playoffs, and as the Oakland A's headed to the World Series to meet the San Francisco Giants, he hoped to show he could dominate there as well. The A's jumped out to a 2-0 lead in the series when Mother Nature struck as an earthquake hit San Francisco just before Game 3. The series was halted, but the A's and Ricky managed to pick up right where they left off after the delay, sweeping the series in 4. Henderson was just as good as he had been in the ALCS, batting .474 with the home run, 3 RBIs, 2 triples, and 3 stolen bases. He had put on one of the greatest performances in postseason history, proving to everyone that he wasn't just an excellent player, but a winning one as well. The A's claimed their 3rd straight AL pennant in 1990, with Henderson notching his first MVP award, after a jaw-dropping season in which he hit .325 and led the league in runs, stolen bases, on-base percentage, OPS, and OPS Plus at a ridiculous 189, the highest mark of his career. He also matched his career high with 28 home runs. Other teams felt helpless to stop Ricky's romp around the base paths. During one close game against the Yankees, the team was setting up for a no-doubles defense late in the game, in which they guarded the lines and attempted not to give up a hit that would produce a runner in scoring position. When Ricky came to the plate, Yankees first baseman Don Mattingly screamed back at the coaches in the dugout, calling for a no-doubles defense. What for? If he gets a single, it's a double anyway. The A's swept the Red Sox in the ALCS before being upset by the underdog Cincinnati Reds in the 1990 World Series. Henderson still managed to bat over .300 that postseason, with 5 stolen bases. Ricky battled injuries over the next 2 seasons, but still managed to lead the AL in stolen bases in 1991. Then, in 1993, he launched home runs to lead off both games of a doubleheader against Cleveland, something no major leaguer had done since 1913. During those years, he never put up an OPS Plus under 135 and never posted an OPS under 800, nor did he swipe less than 48 bags. However, Ricky's second stint with the A's was coming to an end, and in the summer of 1993, he was dealt north of the border to the Toronto Blue Jays, just in time to make another run at the postseason. Ricky played 44 games for the Blue Jays that year and stole 22 bases, playing a key role in the team's first World Series championship, which memorably ended with the walk-off home run by Joe Carter. Guess who was on second base for the historic shot? The 34-year-old Henderson returned to the A's for the 3rd time in the strike-shortened 1994 season, and the following year he hit .300 and stole 32 bases in just 112 games. The A's finished in last place, and Henderson was off to another team in 1996, signing a 2-year deal with the San Diego Padres and taking his talents to the National League for the first time. Henderson, now 37, started to see his production slip a bit. He hit just .241 with 66 stolen bases those 2 seasons before being traded to the Anaheim Angels the following year, and then back to the A's in 1998. Henderson hit just .236 that season, but still managed to lead the AL in stolen bases and walks. But at this point, there was no doubt his career was on the downswing, and many thought he should think about hanging up his spikes. Ricky had other ideas. With yet another new team in 1999, the New York Mets, the 40-year-old Henderson had a resurgence, hitting .315 with a 128 OPS plus, 37 stolen bases, and a .423 on-base percentage. He was named the Sporting News Comeback Player of the Year, but the Mets, after a rough start for Ricky the following year, would release the veteran, and he finished out the season with the Mariners. Come 2001, Henderson was back in San Diego, ready to hit some major milestones. On April 25th, the 42-year-old Ricky took ball 4 to lead off the bottom of the 9th against Jose Mesa of the Phillies. It was the 2,063rd walk of his career, passing Babe Ruth as the all-time leader. A few months later, in a game against the Dodgers, Henderson came to bat in the 3rd inning. He was tied with Ty Cobb as the all-time leader in runs scored. Henderson proceeded to belt a home run and then trotted around the bases. As he neared home plate, Henderson slid in for his 2,246th run, a new record. Now well past his prime, and with 3 of baseball's greatest all-time marks, Henderson still refused to quit. He signed a minor league contract with the Boston Red Sox in 2002, and eventually ended up with the independent Newark Bears of the Atlantic League in 2003. He was 44 years old, making $3,000 playing for an unaffiliated team, but he was still playing the game he loved, and for him, at the time, that was enough. He did end up getting one more shot at the big leagues, signing with the Dodgers and playing 30 games to finish out the season and his career. His final season ended with 3 stolen bases and 0 caught stealing. The self-proclaimed greatest of all time was inducted into the National Baseball Hall of Fame in 2009. In 2017, the Oakland A's named the playing field at the Oakland Coliseum in Henderson's honor. So, will we ever see a player like Rickey Henderson again? Let's start with the numbers. His 1,406 career stolen bases look untouchable, but Rickey wasn't just about speed, as we've discussed. He's still the all-time leader in runs scored with 2,295 and leadoff home runs with 81. His 2,190 career walks are second only to Barry Bonds. He also posted 3,055 hits, 297 home runs, and a ridiculous on-base percentage of .401. He was a 10-time All-Star and an annual MVP contender, winning the award once while finishing in the top 10 of voting 5 other times. As the Athletics general manager, the great Billy Beane once said of Rickey, he's the greatest leadoff hitter of all time, and I'm not sure if there's a close second. Or as his former A's teammate Mitchell Page once said, it wasn't until I saw Rickey that I understood what baseball was about. Rickey Henderson is a run. That's it. When you see Rickey Henderson, I don't care when, the score is already 1-0. And it was more than just raw numbers. Henderson electrified crowds with his showmanship and enthusiasm for the game. Rickey once said, if my uniform doesn't get dirty, I haven't done anything in the baseball game. And it's because of this and so much more that we here at MTC believe we can confidently say that there'll never be another Rickey Henderson. There have now been dozens of elite closers in Major League history. Hoffman, Eckersley, Gossage, Kimbrel, Jansen, and Chapman. Well, sometimes. And there's more cropping up every day, with the likes of flamethrowers like Felix Bautista, Edwin Diaz, and Emmanuel Clase electrifying crowds with their nasty pitches and unforgettable entrances. But there's never been a closer quite like Mariano Rivera. There's never been a pitcher who entered the game from the bullpen who projected such dominance, radiated such certainty. When Mo jogged through the open bullpen doors, the game was as good as over. Rivera's longtime manager with the New York Yankees, Joe Torre, who never took anything for granted, called the formidable reliever the greatest assumption of my life. Others called him the Sandman, the Great One, or the Hammer of God. And every batter who faced him, indeed everyone in the ballpark, knew what pitch was coming. Rivera's cut fastball was almost certainly the best ever thrown of that pitch type, and perhaps the single most effective pitch in baseball history. After all, the best hitters in the game, and in some cases of all time, knew it was coming beyond a shadow of a doubt. And like little leaguers going up against an 85-mile-per-hour heater, they could do very little about it. Rivera rode that pitch to a record 652 career saves, 5 World Series championships, and a .221 career ERA, the best by any pitcher born after 1889. He became the first player ever inducted unanimously into the Baseball Hall of Fame. That's right, there's been just one player ever inducted without a single vote being cast against them, and it's not Babe Ruth, Ty Cobb, Randy Johnson, Ted Williams, or Nolan Ryan. It's Mariano Rivera. Mo's roots are as humble as they come. He was raised in a fishing village in Panama. His family lived in a 2-bedroom house with a tin roof on a dirt road. They had no water or electricity. Mariano Rivera spent 14-hour days out in his fishing boat. The neighborhood kids played baseball with bats made from tree branches, gloves made from milk cartons, and baseballs made from fishnets and electrical tape. Rivera didn't get his first real glove until he was 16 years old. When he was 18, Mariano was invited to play with an amateur team in Panama's top adult league. There, despite a fastball topping out at just 87 miles per hour, his accuracy and smooth delivery caught the eye of a Yankee scout, and he was signed at age 20 to a $2,000 contract in 1990. Most Latin American prospects were identified as teenagers, and the top ones received much bigger contracts than Rivera's. But he had earned a ticket to the US, a little bit of money, and, most importantly, a chance. When he first arrived in the Gulf Coast League, Rivera spoke only Spanish and wrote long letters home at night to his girlfriend and family. He quickly proved he could command his fastball anywhere in the strike zone, but he had just a below-average slider and changeup to go with it. And when he hurt his elbow and had to get Tommy John surgery as a minor leaguer, it looked like his career might be over before it had even begun. But Rivera bounced back quickly and worked his ass off to both learn the native language and make a full recovery, all at the same time. From here, he started picking up more velocity and correspondingly saw his ascent through the minors take off. He got his call to New York and the majors in 1995 after injuries to key Yankees starting pitchers Jimmy Key and Scott Kamenecki. Rivera made his major league debut as a starter on May 23rd against the California Angels. He gave up 5 runs in 3 1/3 innings and took the loss. After the game, Jack Curry of the New York Times wrote, "Another shabby outing by another young pitcher," a daunting headline to saddle a 25-year-old newcomer with, but Rivera persevered. With the fastball now pushing 95, a rare feat in the 90s, he came back later in the season and pitched a 2-hit shutout against the Chicago White Sox, striking out 11. By the end of the 1995 season, the wiry 6'2" Rivera was now in the bullpen and made a big contribution to the Yankees' postseason run. In Game 2 of the ALDS against the Seattle Mariners, Rivera entered the game at a critical moment with one on in the top of the 12th inning and the Yankees trailing by a run. He struck out Jay Buhner and went on to throw 3 1/3 shutout innings, earning his first postseason win when Jim Leyritz blasted a dramatic 15th inning home run to win it. That year as a rookie, he had made 10 starts and 9 relief appearances, going 5-3 with a 5.51 ERA. He still had not truly earned his spot on the roster after this somewhat mediocre campaign, and the Yankees thought about trading their 25-year-old first-year starter to the Detroit Tigers for David Wells. It almost happened before being nixed by the Yankees themselves. This would go on to be one of the most consequential keeps in Yankee history. Even though the Yankees had ended up failing to claim their first World Series in over a decade in 1995, they were still primed to be contenders that next year. Rivera had proved himself in high-leverage spots, but the Yankees already had a closer, John Wetland. Manager Joe Torre decided to use Rivera in the setup role, establishing a 6-2-1 strategy whereby the Yankee starter would be followed by 2 innings of Rivera and then Wetland in the 9th. Mo and John proved to be a nearly invincible tandem for Torre. The Yankees won 29 out of the 31 games in which the two appeared like that, and all but one of Rivera's 26 holds resulted in a save for Wetland. The team also had a 70-3 record when leading after the 6th inning that season. Rivera enjoyed a breakout season, earning 5 saves of his own to go along with a 2.09 ERA and 2.40 ERA+. That's right, he was almost 2.5 times more valuable than an average big league pitcher that campaign. At one point, he threw 26 consecutive scoreless innings, including 15 consecutive hitless innings. He even finished 3rd in the American League Cy Young Award voting. The Yankees also finally got to the World Series, winning it for the first time since 1978. Rivera pitched 5 2/3 innings in the 6-game series against the Atlanta Braves, logging an ERA of just 1.59. Mo's first taste of success in 1996 was just the beginning for the burgeoning Yankees dynasty, and the man who would become the best closer the game had ever seen. After John Wetland departed through free agency over the winter, the closing job fell on Rivera. It did not go well at first. Mo blew 3 of his first 6 save chances to start the 1997 season. He admitted he did not yet feel comfortable in the role. Joe Torre pulled him aside and warned his young closer that he was trying too hard to be perfect, and that he needed to relax a little bit. Rivera responded by picking up 12 straight saves, and then his first All-Star appearance, where he also picked up his first All-Star save. But the big moment for Rivera, and for the history of the game in general, came just before the All-Star break. It was a human Monday, June 23, 1997, in Detroit's Tiger Stadium. Rivera was in the bullpen warming up with Yankees teammate Ramiro Mendoza when the gods decided to turn his right arm into a weapon of mass destruction for baseball bats everywhere. The 4-seam fastballs Rivera threw to Mendoza started to dart about a foot to the left. The pitcher couldn't catch them and worried he might get hurt trying, so he handed over the reins to bullpen catcher Mike Borzello. He too had trouble catching the pitch, which Rivera claimed he was throwing normally. Just like that, Mo's once straight fastball had deserted him, and in its place was a cutter which he could not stop from moving, even when he tried. As Rivera later put it was as if the pitch was dropped straight from the heavens into my hands. In the ensuing weeks, Mo worked with Yankees pitching coach Mel Stottlemyre to refine the pitch and learn how to control it. In time, he figured out with subtle changes to his grip and finger pressure, Rivera could place the cutter wherever he wanted. It would explode away from right-handed hitters and into lefties, with movement so late that hitters were helpless to adjust to it. At times, it seemed to be an outright act of wizardry, defying the very laws of physics with its 6 to 8 inch movement off the plate at the very last moment, by which time the batter would be mid-swing. This gave him perhaps the greatest tool for making homemade lumber in the history of Major League Baseball, and he ran with it. Armed with this new pitch during the second half of the 1997 season, Rivera wound up notching 43 saves along with a minuscule 1.88 ERA and another roughly 2.40 ERA plus season. He also began using his signature entrance theme, Enter Sandman by Metallica. When Rivera came into the game with his cut fastball in tow, it was must-see television, and Yankees fans everywhere were enthralled. Unfortunately, Rivera and the Yankees were not able to defend their World Series title that year, losing in the ALDS to Cleveland. Rivera gave up an uncharacteristic game-tying home run to Sandy Alomar Jr. in Game 4, which Cleveland won in extra innings. Rivera vowed to himself never to let that happen again, and indeed, after that, he would not allow another postseason run for 23 games, tossing a record 34 1/3 consecutive postseason scoreless innings. The Yankees reloaded in 1998 and won a daunting 114 regular season games, and the first of 9 consecutive AL East titles. Rivera overcame an early season groin injury to go 3-0 with a 1.91 ERA and 36 saves. His ERA plus, a new career high at 2.57. The Yankees went on to beat the San Diego Padres in the World Series, earning themselves themselves their first of 3 consecutive titles. Rivera tallied saves in the first, third, and fourth games of the series, concluding a postseason in which he allowed no runs in 13 1/3 innings and recorded 6 saves. In 1998, Rivera led the American League with 45 saves and again posted another ERA under 2 at 1.83, winning his first of 3 Rolaids Relief Man of the Year awards. In the 28 games he appeared in after July 21st, Rivera did not allow a single earned run. The Yankees defended their World Series title successfully as well, sweeping the Braves as Mo earned the series MVP by recording a win and 2 saves, while pitching 4 2/3 scoreless innings. During the clinching game, Rivera broke Atlanta hitter Ryan Klesko's bat 3 times in one plate appearance, giving birth to one of the most iconic moments of his career. All told, during the 18 games of the 1998 and 1999 playoffs, nobody scored a run off Rivera, not a single run. Both Rivera and the Yankees slipped a little bit in 2000, with the Bronx Bombers dropping 27 wins off their total from 2 years ago to go 87 and 74, with Rivera posting the worst ERA and ERA plus since his rookie year at 2.85 and 170. But come October, the Yankees, who still somehow won the AL East, found themselves in the World Series yet again, this time against their crosstown rival Mets. Rivera picked up 2 more World Series saves and was yet again on the hill for the final play of the series, when he got Mike Piazza to fly out to Bernie Williams in center field. With that out, Rivera became the only pitcher to record the final out in 3 consecutive World Series. But alas, all good things must come to an end, or bad things depending on how you feel about the Yankees. In 2001, Rivera notched a career-high 50 saves, breaking the Yankee franchise record of 46 set by Dave Righetti in 1986. It was another typically great Mo season, a 2.34 ERA, 0.91 WHIP, and over 9 Ks per 9. He and the Yankees again returned to the World Series, this time against the Arizona Diamondbacks. But this is where the train would take a bit of a detour from the norm. With the series tied at 3 games apiece, Rivera took the mound in the 8th inning with the Yankees leading 2-1. They were looking to capture their 5th title in 6 years, and with their lights-out closer on the hill, things were looking pretty good. And after Rivera struck out the side in the 8th, things were looking really good. At that point, the Yankees were 155-1 in franchise history when leading a postseason game after 8 innings. Then, incredibly, things went sideways on Rivera and the Yankees in the 9th. Mo himself first botched a bunt play by Damian Miller, then one Tony Womack double and Luis Gonzalez single later, and the Diamondbacks were celebrating their first World Series championship as Rivera, the Yankees, and the world stared on in disbelief. Gonzalez's hit wasn't even a good one. It was a routine pop-up under normal conditions, but with the infield in, it was just enough. It would be Rivera's first and only career postseason loss in 96 appearances. In 2002, Rivera battled injuries which limited him to 46 innings, 28 saves, and another low ERA plus for him of 163. What's more, for the first time in what felt like ages, the Yankees failed to advance past the first round of the playoffs. But in 2003, Mo and the Yankees were back. Mariano put up 40 saves along with a 166 ERA, the best of his career to that point. And when New York found themselves in a make-or-break Game 7 of the ALCS against their arch-rival Boston Red Sox, it was Rivera who stepped up to toss 3 scoreless innings late until Aaron Boone launched a walk-off homer to send the Yankees to the World Series, which they ended up losing to the Florida Marlins, courtesy of an all-time performance by rookie Josh Beckett. Rivera reeled off another career-high 53 saves in 2004 and squared off against the Boston Red Sox in an ALCS rematch. Again, Rivera would find himself in the middle of baseball history, and this time, as in Arizona, on the losing side. Clinging to a 4-3 lead in Game 4 and up 3-0 over the Red Sox in the series, Rivera entered the game to send the Yankees to yet another World Series. Rivera walked Kevin Millar, and pinch runner Dave Roberts then proceeded to steal perhaps the most important base in Red Sox history. Mo then threw a cutter to Boston's Bill Mueller, and it didn't cut enough. Mueller lined it up the middle, and Roberts scored the tying run. The Red Sox would later win on a David Ortiz walk-off home run. Rivera then blew his second save in as many nights by failing to close out the ALCS in Game 5. This was the only time in his storied career he would blow back-to-back postseason saves. The Red Sox went on from there to come back to win the ALCS, before going on to win the World Series for the first time in 86 years. For nearly a decade, Mariano Rivera pitched in some of the biggest games in the sport. If you were watching playoff baseball during this time, you were witnessing history, and also the mastery of Mariano. However, in his last 9 big league seasons from 2005 to 2013, the Yankees were no longer as dominant, winning only a single championship in that time. But Rivera maintained his stranglehold over the league. At age 35, he nailed down 43 saves in 2005 to go with the career-low 138 ERA, also posting his first campaign with an ERA plus over 300. He followed that up with the 180 ERA in 2006, when he also became the 4th Major League pitcher ever to reach 400 saves. In 2007, the Yankees made Mo the highest paid reliever in baseball history by signing him to a 3-year, $45 million contract, and he repaid them in 2008 by converting 39 of 40 opportunities with a 1.40 ERA. It was during this season he posted his career high in ERA+, at a staggering mark of 3.16. The Yankees and Rivera won that last title in 2009, beating the Phillies in 5 games to close out the team's 27th championship and Rivera's 5th. It also marked a record 4th time he closed out the Fall Classic. Not content to stop there, Rivera posted 33 saves and a 1.80 ERA in his age 40 season in 2010, and the records continue to pile up. In May 2011, Rivera pitched in his 1,000th career game, the most by any pitcher with one team. Later that season, he recorded the 602nd save of his career, passing Trevor Hoffman for the all-time lead. Prior to the 2013 season, Rivera announced he would retire at year's end. So how would the 43-year-old perform in his final campaign? How about saving 44 games with a 2.11 ERA? New York City Mayor Michael Bloomberg declared September 22nd of that season Mariano Rivera Day. Metallica performed a live rendition of Enter Sandman, and Mariano became the only active player to have his number retired, also becoming the last major leaguer ever to wear number 42, Jackie Robinson's now universally retired number. A few days later, Rivera made his last appearance for the Yankees, retiring all 4 batters he faced before he was pulled from the game. Longtime teammates Derek Jeter and Andy Pettitte went to the mound as 48,675 fans at Yankee Stadium cheered and chanted Mariano. Mo fought back the tears. Baseball's best closer had exited his final game. Mariano Rivera's career numbers are jaw-dropping, awe-inspiring, and quite simply unbelievable. In 19 seasons, he posted a record 652 saves. His career ERA of 2.21 ranks first among all pitchers who started their career in the live ball era, as does his 952 games finished and 2.05 career ERA+. He was named to 13 All-Star teams and was a 5-time World Series champion. A good case can also be made that Rivera was the greatest pitcher postseason baseball has ever seen. Over 96 playoff appearances, his ERA was 0.7 in 141 innings, with a 0.76 whip, 42 saves, and just 1 career loss. But Rivera's legacy goes beyond the numbers. His effectiveness, dependability, and longevity were unrivaled in his era. He spent his full career in Yankee pinstripes, embodying a model of class on and off the field, respected by everyone who played with and against him. Major League Baseball even named an award after him to recognize the American League Reliever of the Year. As the longtime Yankees manager Joe Girardi once put it, he's the best I've ever been around. Mo might have also possessed the best pitch ever thrown by a Major League arm. Even those who enjoyed success against him, like Ichiro Suzuki, who went 6 for 15 lifetime with a walk-off dinger, labeled his cutter as the single toughest pitch they ever faced. The cutter itself, which has proliferated in recent years partially because of Rivera's success, is also one of his greatest legacies. But of course, while there are many imitators today, there are still no real rivals. All of this, and so much more than we could ever put into one video, is why we at MTC believe we can safely say, there will never be another Mariano Rivera. For nearly 2 decades in the heart of St. Louis, behind home plate in Busch Stadium, there stood a wall. Not of brick and mortar, but of firm determination and unflinching defensive skill and baseball intelligence. That wall was, of course, Yadier Molina, or Yadi, to legions of adoring Cardinals fans. Yadi wasn't your typical Hall of Famer. He wasn't ridiculously athletic, his bat wasn't always the best, and you'd be hard-pressed to find a slower base runner. But behind the plate, that's where the magic happened. We're talking about laser throws that shut down opposing base stealers dead in their tracks for almost 2 decades. A glove that seemed to snag everything, then yank it into the strike zone, and a mind that could call a game like a symphony conductor. Over his illustrious 19-year career, all with the Cardinals, Yadi played a key role in the team's 2 World Series championships, helping his team get to the postseason 13 times in those 19 years. The 2,184 games he spent behind the plate represent the most caught by any player for a single team in baseball history. Add to that 10 All-Star nods, 9 Gold Gloves, 4 Platinum Gloves, and 1 Silver Slugger Award, and you truly do have one of the most impressive bodies of work by any catcher in Major League Baseball history. But despite his numerous awards and milestones reached, it really was the less quantifiable aspects of Yadi's game that set him apart from other catchers. And although we are getting better at measuring things like pitch framing or game calling, both sabermetrics and traditional scouts acknowledge that even these advanced statistics failed to capture the full extent of Yadier's abilities, especially going back to his prime, and what it meant to the Cardinals to have him on the field all of those years. So, is it even possible to get our heads around what made Yadi so special, and will it be enough to eventually earn him a place in the Baseball Hall of Fame, despite less than impressive counting stats on many fronts? Born in 1982 in Puerto Rico, Yadier was the youngest of 3 boys. Baseball was ingrained in Yadier's life from the start. His father, Benjamin Molina Sr., was an accomplished player himself, one good enough to be elected into the Puerto Rican Baseball Hall of Fame. He instilled a love for the game in his 3 sons. Each day after dinner, Benji Sr. would take his boys across the street to the park to train them in the fundamentals of the game into the late hours of the evening. Yadier's 2 older brothers, Benji Jr. and Jose, also became standout defensive catchers with lengthy big league careers. And believe it or not, the Molinas grew up in a community that was actually nicknamed the Village of the Squatters. It was a name meant to refer to the laborers in local sugarcane fields, but it now also suits the group of major league catchers who grew up there. While not the biggest kid, Yadi did possess a special talent for catching. His strong arm and exceptional throwing accuracy caught the eyes of scouts early on. By age 16, he had grown into a 5'11", 220-pound body that was similar to that of his 2 older brothers. Still, Yadier's bat was not on par with his defense. One early scouting report on him read simply, "Defensive catcher, great arm, weak bat." But his catching skills and his Molina heritage were enough for the St. Louis Cardinals to make the 17-year-old a 4th-round selection in the 2000 MLB draft. Give him anything he wants. That was the advice the Cardinals scouting director received when he selected the catcher with the 113th overall pick. Yadi was ultimately given a $325,000 signing bonus, an amount higher than his slot had warranted. Yadier's rise through the Cardinals minor league system was steady, but not spectacular. He impressed coaches with his work ethic and defensive prowess, but his offensive contributions were still modest, and really not all that projectable. In 2004, the youngest Molina brother received his first big league call-up. The Cardinals were a team on the rise, led by young stars like Albert Pujols and Adam Wainwright. Yadier, just a few weeks shy of his 22nd birthday, made his debut in June. In his first game in the starting lineup, he had 2 hits, and threw out the first of the 345 runners he would gun down in his career. Molina was mostly used as a backup to his future Cards manager Mike Matheny in his rookie season, but it was a great time to get his first taste of big league ball. Led by Pujols and Wainwright, along with other stars like Scott Rowland and Jim Edmonds, the Redbirds notched 105 regular season victories, capturing the NL pennant before falling to the historic Boston Red Sox in the 2004 World Series. Molina appeared in just 7 postseason games overall, but still managed to throw out future Hall of Famer Craig Biggio at second base in Game 4 of the NLCS against the Astros. Mike Matheny signed with the Giants the following offseason, leaving Molina as the default starting catcher in 2005, a job he would put in a vice lock for the next 17 seasons. His offensive production during this time remained modest, but his skills at leadership on the field seemed to grow exponentially. He also formed a potent battery with ace Adam Wainwright, with the communication and trust he inspired with his staff becoming a cornerstone of the Cardinals' pitching success. Despite slashing only .252, .295, .358 with a low 70 OPS plus in his first full season, Yadier announced his presence with authority behind the dish. In nearly 1,000 innings, only 39 base runners attempted to steal against him. He threw out 25 of those brave enough to try, an insanely impressive 64% caught stealing percentage. Most backstops are considered productive if they limit 25 to 40% of all base stealers. Yadi was already about doubly that good. The Cardinals won 100 games that season, but would fall in 6 games in the NLCS to a stacked Astros squad that would themselves end up falling to the White Sox in the World Series. The 2006 season was an interesting one for Yadi. While his defensive contributions were undeniable, his offensive production was the worst of his big league career so far. An OPS that had hovered around 700 the prior 2 years fell to 595, and he only managed to blast 6 home runs the whole campaign, despite playing in 129 games, a career high to that point. He finished the season with an abysmal OPS plus of 53, the 3rd lowest in all of Major League Baseball among players with at least 400 plate appearances. The Cardinals, however, saw a long-term future with the young catcher leading their charge on the mound, and stuck with him game after game. That faith paid off handsomely, starting in that year's postseason. The turning point in Yadier's career at the plate seemed to come in the 2006 NLCS against the New York Mets. The Cardinals, who had won just 83 games, were heavy underdogs against the 97-win Mets, led by future Hall of Famers like Tom Glavine and Pedro Martinez. In the top of the 9th, the teams were tied in a decisive Game 7. Cardinals third baseman Scott Rowland lined a single to left field. Despite having some bats on the bench, Cards skipper Tony La Russa elected to keep his light-hitting catcher in to hit, as the game looked likely to go into extra innings. The still baby-faced Yadier stepped up to the plate with a chance to give the Cardinals the lead. He would end up delivering a clutch 2-run home run, swatting the first pitch he saw into the left field bullpen, propelling the Cardinals to victory and another World Series appearance. It was from this point that Yadier wouldn't post an OPS plus under 80 in a season until his last year at age 39. The Redbirds went on to easily defeat the Detroit Tigers in 5 games to win the World Series that year, with Molina hitting .412 in the series, including 3 hits in the final game off a young rising ace in Justin Verlander. By the time Yadier embraced Wainwright on the mound after the final out, he had cemented his place as a fan favorite and key contributor to the team's success. Over the next decade, he established himself as one of the best defensive catchers in baseball history, if not outright the best. He won the Gold Glove Award a staggering 9 times, including 8 in a row. As we said in the intro, his ability to call games, frame pitches, and control the running game was unmatched. More on that in a minute. And as Yadier matured, so did his offensive contributions. He began to hit more like he had in the 06 postseason. In 2007, Molina slashed .275, .340, .368, raising that to 96 the following season to go along with his first over .300 average at .304. In 2009, Molina was named as an All-Star for the first time, as he had came to be regarded as one of the most consistent players in the game by this point. It was in 2011, during Molina's 8th year in the big leagues, that he finally established himself as a real threat in the box as well as behind it. These included personal bests in home runs at 14, RBIs at 65, and batting average at .305, not to mention a 124 OPS plus, making him almost 25% better than a league average hitter. He was, without question, one of the most valuable players in baseball overall. The Cardinals won the World Series yet again, defeating the Texas Rangers in a thrilling 7-game series. Yadier, despite his slow start in the Fall Classic, as he went hitless in his first 2 games, came alive with a vengeance in the final 5. During that span, he had .471 with 9 key RBIs. Following the Cardinals' victory in the World Series, Molina received a 5-year contract extension worth $75 million. All in all, Molina certainly lived up to the expectations of the deal, emerging as a strong candidate for MVP in both 2012 and 2013. In 2012, he experienced the best offensive season of his career to that point, hitting 22 home runs with 76 RBIs and an impressive 137 OPS plus. Combining this offensive performance with his unwavering defensive abilities, Molina's BWAR ended up being 7.2, second only to another catcher, Buster Posey, in the National League. This led to him finishing top 5 in MVP voting for the first time in his career, coming in at a strong 4th overall. In the first year under new manager and former teammate Mike Matheny, the 2012 Cardinals advanced to the National League Championship Series before losing to the San Francisco Giants in 7 games. Molina himself had a standout performance in that series, batting .393, but at the end of the day, it wasn't quite enough. Yadi's bat continued to shine alongside his defense in 2013. That season, Molina launched 12 homers to go along with the 129 OPS plus, his 3rd straight season over 120, and a 6.2 WAR, another elite total for a catcher. This time he placed 3rd in MVP voting, with the Cardinals winning the pennant before ultimately falling to the Red Sox in the World Series. This would be the closest the Redbirds would ever get to winning another championship with Molina. Having delivered 3 outstanding offensive seasons in a row to go along with his consistently outstanding Gold Glove caliber defense, Yadier earned a spot on the cover of Sports Illustrated 2014 preview issue. That season he was selected for a 6th consecutive All-Star game, but injured his right thumb and ended up missing 40 games after a rough slide into third base. He finished with just 7 homers and a .386 slugging, his lowest total since 2010 in both categories, but he still managed to maintain his exceptional defensive abilities, helping him to post a still impressive 3.2 WAR. The Cardinals won the NL Central before losing to the Giants in the NLCS, marking the 3rd consecutive defeat to the Giants in the postseason. Molina would never again reach the offensive heights of 2012 and 2013, posting an OPS plus of just 80 in 2015, before rebounding to a respectable 111 in 2016. But beyond his individual accolades, Yadier remained a true leader for the Cardinals. He was a vocal presence in the clubhouse, a mentor to younger players, and the emotional heart and soul of the team. His on-field intensity and fiery competitiveness were infectious, inspiring his teammates to play their best consistently, especially the Cardinals' crop of young pitchers. There are a few players who have been more beloved by their home fans than Yadier Molina. After all, they had witnessed his growth from a backup catcher on the 2004 World Series team to a starting catcher who had struggled with his hitting to a premier defensive catcher and offensive threat who was considered a serious contender for an MVP. Now, they were watching him build a solid Hall of Fame case. It's also worth noting the historic partnership between Molina and Adam Wainwright during this time. The careers of these two players are intertwined like no other duo in baseball history. Together they made 328 regular season starts, breaking the previously held record of 324, set by the Tigers' Mickey Lolich and Bill Freehan. The narrative of the St. Louis Cardinals of the 21st century cannot be told without mentioning both Wainwright and Molina together. By the late 2010s, Father Time had started to catch up with Molina. From 2017 through 2019, his age 34 to 36 seasons, Molina was an average hitter for a catcher with respectable power, putting up an average OPS plus of 95 over those 3 seasons. Because of his somewhat declining defensive metrics, however, his average WAR in these years declined to 1.6. However, his leadership and experience remained valuable assets, especially in the postseason. 13 years after his glorious 2006 home run, Molina showed he still had a flair for the big moment. Despite hitting just 152 in the 2019 postseason, Yadier came up in Game 4 of the NLDS with the Cards down 2-1 to the Braves in a must-win game. In the 8th inning, the Cardinals were trailing 4-3. With one out and Paul Goldschmidt on second, Yadier stepped to the plate and delivered a soft bloop into right field, tying the game at 4. 2 innings later, Molina came up with Colton Wong on third and launched a walk-off sacrifice fly to win the game and force a Game 5, which the Cards promptly won. They wouldn't end up winning a title, but that moment still gave a new generation of St. Louis Cardinals fans their own memorable postseason Yadi moment. In the years that followed, Yadi would end up notching some pretty impressive career accomplishments, especially for a catcher. In 2020, Molina became just the 9th backstop to rack up 2,000 career hits. The following year, he caught his 2,000th game behind the plate, becoming the 6th catcher ever to do so, and the very first to do so with a single franchise. Poetically, it was Adam Wainwright who ended up starting on the mound for that one. Then, in his final season in 2022, a 39-year-old Molina caught a pop-up off the bat of the Pirates' Brian Hayes. It was his 14,865th put-out as catcher, passing Ivan Pudge Rodriguez for the MLB record. He announced his retirement after that season, walking away as a 2-time World Series champion, a 9-time Gold Glover, and one of the most respected players in baseball history. He singled in his final postseason at-bat in the 2022 Wild Card Series that the Cards lost to the Phillies. It's also worth mentioning that throughout his career, Yadi remained deeply connected to his Puerto Rican roots. He represented his homeland with pride in the World Baseball Classic, leading them to 2 second-place finishes, including notching his now iconic heads-up play where he nailed a runner celebrating prematurely. This play represented him as a player well, always heads up, always focused, and consistently game-changing defensively. When all was said and done, Yadier Molina was a 10-time All-Star, a 9-time Gold Glove winner, a key contributor to 2 World Series championships, one of the greatest framers of all time, and perhaps the greatest base-running deterrent in baseball history. So, should we be thinking about him as a potential Hall of Famer? The answer to that question largely hinges on just how good we think Yadier was behind the plate overall. Foolish Baseball already did an in-depth video on this, which we highly recommend you check out, but we'll do our best here at MTC to make our case as well. The main case against him is clearly his offensive numbers, which are good overall but not great. Sure, he's just the 8th backstop to eclipse milestones of 2,000 hits and 1,000 RBI, and the other 7 to do so are in the Hall of Fame. But when you take a closer look at Molina's production against some of the other players who had a minimum of 5,000 career plate appearances and at least 50% career games caught, it's not quite as impressive. Molina's career OPS plus of 96 ranks 40th, his .277 average ranks 24th, and his offensive WAR of 28 ranks 34th, with several contemporary catchers outranking him in that last category, including Jason Kendall, Joe Mauer, and Buster Posey, and those guys played significantly less games than Yadi to tally this cumulative stat. So, on the offensive side, Yadi doesn't really have an airtight case. First, a quick note on catchers more broadly, who tend to be underrepresented in the Hall of Fame. The demanding nature of this position is just so much more challenging than the others on the field. While offensive contributions are also expected from catchers, evaluating their performance remains difficult compared to these other position players. This has led many catchers to be kept out when they probably should have been let in because they were being compared to many other players who had a much better chance to put up offensive numbers at the plate because their positions weren't nearly as taxing. With that being said, how does Yadier stack up defensively? For starters, he earned 9 Gold Gloves, 3rd most all-time for backstops behind Ivan Rodriguez and Johnny Bench, both first-ballot Hall of Famers. Not too shabby. But we couldn't go really any time without talking about that arm of his. It was obviously elite, but just how well does his career caught stealing percentage of 40.3% stack up against the greats? To answer that, we need to give some context. The great defensive catchers of the 1970s and 80s, like Johnny Bench and Thurman Munson, threw out around 43 to 44% of all base runners. Higher than even Molina, right? But that was a different era. Base runners ran more then. The average caught stealing rate was around 35%, meaning a 65% success rate. In the modern era, teams have realized that running less and more successfully is a better approach, targeting around a 75% success rate. So, during Molina's career, according to Fangraphs, the average caught stealing rate in baseball was around 27%. This makes Molina's 40% about 48% better than the average catcher at throwing out runners. To put that number into context, that's not unlike having an OPS plus of 148 as a hitter over 19 seasons. That's certainly Hall of Fame caliber. You see, it wasn't just that he was so good at throwing out base stealers. He instilled so much fear in opposing players that many of them just ended up abandoning their attempt to steal altogether. His signature move involved throwing behind the runner, taking advantage of their momentary lapse in focus or alertness. And it worked. From the time Molina joined the Cardinals in 2004 until 2020, the team experienced the lowest number of stolen base attempts among all Major League teams, compiling 500 fewer attempts than the next closest team. Cardinals pitchers were also just simply much better when Molina was behind the plate during this period. The team's pitchers achieved an ERA of .369 with Molina behind the dish. When Yadi wasn't present, the ERA increased to .412. That's a substantial difference of approximately 0.43 runs per game. That's well, let's say an uncommon trait. Even other elite defensive catchers in baseball history like Johnny Bench and Bill Freehan had catcher ERAs that were significantly worse than this. Part of this may also be due to Molina's other superpower, pitch framing. This technique has come under increasing scrutiny in recent years. In response, Fangraphs and Baseball Prospectus even took the step of revising their WAR calculations for modern catchers, integrating the latest pitch framing metrics as a result. When Fangraphs released updated WAR figures for catchers, the new approach boosted Molina's career value significantly. As such, Yadi's career total F-WAR now stands at 55.7, a number that is the 10th highest among all backstops in baseball history, and noticeably higher than his career B-WAR, which remains around 42. Plus, both Fangraphs and Baseball Prospectus rank Molina first in their defensive runs above average components to their WAR calculations. So, in short, it's not an exaggeration to say that Molina is probably the best defensive catcher in baseball history, and a pretty great one overall even when considering his hitting. And hey, despite having some of those more mediocre offensive numbers overall, Molina did hit the best when it counted most, including a career average of .312 in 39 NLCS contests and .328 in 21 World Series games. One decent comparison for Molina is another great Cardinal, shortstop Ozzie Smith, the Wizard of Oz himself. Smith is regarded as one of the best shortstops to ever play the game, and while he too had his moments at the plate, including in the postseason, he was indeed not a stud. In fact, his career on-base percentage of .337 is roughly equal to Molina's .339. Did Ozzie Smith make it to Hall of Fame? Yes, on the very first ballot. And yes, we do value defense differently now, but Yadi was also certainly better at the plate overall than Ozzie was, especially for his position. Yadier Molina's story is one of dedication to his craft and an unwavering passion for the game. Forged over 2 decades, born into a baseball family and nurtured in the baseball-rich culture of Puerto Rico, he rose from a decent prospect with good but not insane potential to a legend behind the plate. His defensive prowess, leadership, and clutch play stood out in a way that few catchers ever have, putting up a body of work that could very well be considered the best ever defensively for a catcher overall. His key involvement in 2 World Series titles and numerous All-Star selections also contribute to his stature in the game. Sometimes, a player is more than the sum of their statistical achievements, and Yadier Molina is perhaps the perfect example of that player. All of this, and so much more than we could ever hope to break down in one video, is the reason that we here at MTC believe that there will never be another Yadier Molina. Major League Baseball in the 1990s and early 2000s was dominated by hitters. Oversized sluggers like Mark McGwire, Barry Bonds, and Sammy Sosa shattered home run records seemingly every year during the period that is now known as the steroid era. It was a brutal time to be a pitcher, unless of course you were juiced yourself like Roger Clemens, or a freak of nature like Randy Johnson, or a pitching mastermind like Greg Maddux, or unless you were Pedro Martinez. Though small in stature at just 5'11" and 170 pounds, Pedro today easily ranks as one of the most imposing power pitchers in the history of the game, as well as quite simply one of the best. With a repertoire that included mind-boggling stuff as well as cutthroat intimidation tactics, Martinez etched his name into baseball history in a manner that will never be forgotten, and perhaps never again rivaled. In fact, the absolute peak of his career, from 1997 through 2003, might just be the most dominant run of starting pitching the game has ever seen, period. But how exactly did this undersized titan get there, and how would he follow it up? Come along with us today as we explore the career of Pedro, and why we believe there will never be another pitcher quite like him. Pedro Martinez was born into abject poverty in the Dominican Republic. He was one of 5 children to a father who was a janitor and a mom who washed clothes. The family lived in a small tin roof shack with dirt floors. As a child, Pedro worshipped his older brother Ramon, himself a formidable prospect, and when he ended up signing with the Dodgers and going to their local baseball academy, 13-year-old Pedro came along. When an LA scout noticed the skinny teenager clocking around 80 on the radar gun, they signed him as well. And at age 16, he began his road to the big leagues, following in his big brother's footsteps. In 1991, the 19-year-old rose rapidly through all 3 levels of the Dodgers minor league system, posting an impressive record of 18-8 with a 2.28 ERA and 192 strikeouts in his first professional season. The Sporting News named him its minor league player of the year. Young Pedro was just 5'9" and 160 pounds at the time, but armed with a low 90s fastball and a nasty changeup like Ramon, the big league team took notice. During spring training in 1992, the team's executive vice president Fred Clare famously declared, "I won't trade Pedro Martinez. I don't care who they offer." Those were words that would go on to haunt him and the Dodgers for years to come. The 20-year-old Pedro struggled a little bit in AAA and would not go on to make the major leagues until September, where he pitched a complete game but lost his first major league start 3-1 in Cincinnati. He joined his brother Ramon full-time in the big leagues in 1993, where he appeared in 65 games, almost entirely in relief. He finished with a 10-5 record and 2.61 ERA, while managing to strike out 119 batters in just 107 innings pitched. An impressive rookie season. However, things were not all good in Hollywood. The Dodgers manager at the time, Tommy Lasorda, didn't believe Pedro had the endurance to be a major league starter, hence his appearances out of the pen. As such, he advised the front office to make the young hurler available for trade, as elite relievers weren't exactly a hot commodity in the early 90s. So, under this frame of thinking, Fred Claire traded Pedro for promising second base prospect Delano DeShields from the Expos. This would almost immediately backfire. Montreal plugged Martinez into their starting rotation in 1994, alongside the likes of Ken Hill and Jeff Facero, and the team proceeded to immediately enjoy their best season in franchise history, posting the best record in baseball until the player strike derailed their chances at a World Series title. Martinez announced his presence with authority in Canada, going 11-5 with a 1.24 ERA+, striking out a batter an inning and garnering the nickname Senior Plunk because of his tendency to throw inside, over and over and over again. That year, Pedro led the league with 11 hit batsmen, got thrown out of a dozen games, most of which he wasn't pitching in, and got into 3 separate fights. In April, Pedro took a perfect game into the 8th inning when he hit the Reds' Reggie Sanders on the elbow, sparking a bench-clearing brawl. The 22-year-old Martinez had earned the reputation as a fiery headhunter, but he was about to become known as something more, one of the best pitchers in the history of the game. In 1995, Martinez won 14 games and struck out 174 batters, while hitting 11 of them yet again. It wasn't a world-shattering campaign, but he did accomplish something that set the baseball world on watch nonetheless. In June, Martinez became the first player since Harvey Haddix to take a perfect game into extra innings. Martinez would go on to give up a double to Bip Roberts in the 10th inning to lose his bid at history, but regardless, this helped show off just a fraction of the dominance that was to come. The following season, in 1996, Pedro went 13-10, getting very little in run support from the Expos, who scored just 22 total runs in those losses. But Martinez, now 24, was still getting better and better, including earning his first All-Star selection. This was also the year he broke 200 innings and Ks for the first time. And then, in 1997, his final season in Montreal, he took things to a whole other level, one few pitchers have ever reached. He went 17-8 with a jaw-dropping, league-leading B-WAR of 9.0. He led the National League in ERA at 190, Ks at 305, complete games with 13, and ERA Plus with a mind-numbing 219 mark, making him over doubly as good as an average pitcher. In the process, he became the first Expos player to win the Cy Young, and also the first Dominican pitcher to do so. The 25-year-old All-Star had developed a daunting arsenal, which included 3 world-class pitches, a tailing high 90s fastball, a wicked curve, and a nasty all-time great circle change. Pedro could practically toy with hitters with this stuff, especially due to the fact he could command it so well. Plus, his willingness to come inside could leave batters tasting dirt just as easily as flailing at yet another nasty offering. "I'm not afraid of hitting anyone," he once said, "because I can put the ball exactly where I want to." But sadly for Montreal, this is where his run of dominance would come to an end north of the border. Fearing he would incur a massive pay raise following his dominant season, they decided to trade their Cy Young winner to Boston for Carl Pavano and Tony Armas. This would, as it had for the Dodgers, end up aging like old cereal milk. In his first season in a Red Sox uniform, Martinez went 19-7 with a 2.89 ERA and 251 strikeouts, earning a third straight All-Star nod while just losing out on another Cy Young award to a chemically enhanced Roger Clemens. Pedro finally got a taste of the postseason too, winning his only start against the Indians in the ALDS before Boston eventually bowed out. If 1998 was dominant, Pedro's 1999 season was just plain historic, going 23-4 with a 2.07 ERA and 313 strikeouts were enough to win him the Triple Crown and his second Cy Young award. He also reset his personal highs with an ERA plus of 243 and a B-WAR of 9.8, with both totals also pacing the majors, obviously. What's more, he also had one of the most iconic moments of his career that season as well, showing out on a national stage in the All-Star game versus a slew of roid heads. In front of the hometown faithful at Fenway, Pedro struck out 5 of the 6 batters he faced, en route to winning the MVP of the contest. His competition in that game included no less than Sammy Sosa, Mark McGwire, Larry Walker, Barry Larkin, and Jeff Bagwell, all players who, under normal circumstances, would have been no doubt Hall of Famers. He also started to make a name for himself in the postseason. In the deciding Game 5 of the ALDS against Cleveland, Pedro entered a tie game in relief in the 4th inning, before pitching 5 scoreless no-hit innings to shut down the Indians and launch his team into the next round. Martinez won his showdown against the Yankees' Roger Clemens in the ALCS, but the Red Sox lost that series in 5 games. It seemed impossible that Martinez could ever have another season like 1999, but he came out in 2000 and somehow pitched even better. And what was the height of the steroid era, when other major league pitchers were getting tape measure moonshots hit off them left and right, Pedro just flat out annihilated opposing batters, winning his second consecutive Cy Young Award, going 18-6 with 284 strikeouts and a microscopic 1.74 ERA. He held opponents to a 2.13 OBP, the lowest recorded in 100 years. His ERA plus was an absurd 2.91, the best in modern baseball history. His 11.7 B-WAR was also the 5th highest recorded in the live ball era. It's hard to even describe succinctly how good Pedro was in 2000, so we want to advise you to watch Foolish Baseball's video that covers in depth both this year and his other insane prime seasons as well. Martinez and the record books were sidelined a little in the following season, 2001, because of a rotator cuff injury that knocked him out for 2 months. He still went 7-3 with a 2.69 ERA, but he wound up only throwing 116 innings, while posting his first sub-200 ERA plus season in 3 years at 188. But he rebounded in 2002, winning 20 games while striking out 239 hitters, with a 2.26 ERA and 2.02 ERA plus. This again led the league, but alas, due to an abundance of old-time thinking concerning the importance of wins, he finished second in the Cy Young voting to Oakland's 23-game winner Barry Zito, a pitcher who had an ERA half a run higher than him and an ERA plus almost 50 points worse. Martinez had risen to be one of the best pitchers in the game, but he also retained the intimidation factor that he'd become known for as a young hurler. Armed with his now more so low 90s heater, he still was willing to challenge anyone, and try to scare them while doing it too. When I hit a batter, Martinez later wrote in his book, it was 90% intentional. For example, after Roger Clemens once drilled his Red Sox teammate Kevin Millar, Martinez, watching from the dugout, said that he, quote, filed that at the top of his to-do list. What exactly did that mean? Well, plunking both Derek Jeter and Alfonso Soriano the next time he faced them. Both players had to leave early to have x-rays taken. Martinez joked to teammates, at least I gave them a discount in an ambulance. They both got to go in the same one. Sometimes Senor Plunk's competitive fire got the best of him, like in the 2003 ALCS. That year, Martinez had another outstanding, all-time great campaign, with a 14-4 record and league-leading 2.22 ERA and 2.11 ERA+. But during his first start in Game 3 of that series, against old nemesis Clemens and the Yankees, Martinez threw a pitch behind Yankees outfielder Kareem Garcia in the 4th inning. But after Clemens threw a pitch high and inside to Red Sox slugger Manny Ramirez the following inning, the benches cleared. The Yankees' 72-year-old bench coach Don Zimmer charged the 32-year-old Martinez, who threw him to the ground. No one was injured, but it was ugly. Martinez later called it the only thing he would like to erase from his career. Of course, the 2003 ALCS would only get worse for Martinez in Boston. In the deciding Game 7, Pedro and the Red Sox took a 5-2 lead into the 8th, coming just 6 outs away from the World Series. After Pedro gave up hits to Derek Jeter and Bernie Williams, the Red Sox were up by just 2 with 1 out, a runner on, and Hideki Matsui coming up. Pedro had thrown 115 pitches, and, to many, he looked gassed. Red Sox manager Grady Little came to the mound and asked if his ace had anything left. Pedro said he did, and Little left him in. Matsui followed with a ground rule double, then Jorge Posada came through with a 2 RBI single, and suddenly, the game was tied. Aaron Boone would go on to hit the series-winning homer off of reliever Tim Wakefield in the 11th. The Red Sox, still at the time riding a drought over 80 years old, were bounced from the playoffs. Grady Little was promptly fired. Pedro finally fell down to earth in 2004, going 16-9 with a 3.90 ERA, the highest of his career to date, along with the 1.24 ERA+, his worst mark since 1995. But this wouldn't deter the Red Sox, who followed up that heartbreaking loss from the previous year with the historic, curse-breaking World Series championship, coming back from a 3-0 deficit in their ALCS rematch with the Yankees before sweeping the St. Louis Cardinals in the World Series. Pedro pitched 7 shutout innings for the win in Game 3 of that WS. It would be Pedro's first and only World Series title. After some apparently tenuous contract negotiations with the Sox, during which Pedro later described their offers as disrespectful, Martinez took his talents to the Big Apple in 2005, signing with the New York Mets as a free agent for 4 years and $53 million. He was now 33 years old, but quickly proved he still had some gas left in the tank. In his first season with the Mets, he made the National League All-Star team, going 15-8 with a 2.82 ERA, as well as leading the majors with a 0.95 WHIP, one of the best marks of his career overall. Things started to come apart a bit in 2006, including the breakdown of Pedro's body at large. Injuries to his toe, calf, and hip limited him to just 23 starts, and his ERA ballooned to a new career high of 4.48. It was the first season in his career he registered as a below-average pitcher by ERA Plus as well, at a total of just 98. A torn rotator cuff finished off his season and required surgery. As a result, Martinez missed most of 2007, but he did manage to return for 5 starts, during which he crossed a major milestone, striking out his 3,000th career batter in Cincinnati that September. Pedro battled injuries again in 2008, his final season in NY, and the 36-year-old had the worst year of his career, bar none, including new career worst totals of a 5.61 ERA, 75 ERA Plus, and just 7.2 Ks per 9. It looked like the end for one of baseball's best ever, but Martinez wasn't quite done, signing a 1-year deal in mid-season the following year with the defending champion Philadelphia Phillies. He would go on to perform decently for them, posting a 3.63 ERA and 1.17 ERA Plus in 9 starts. Philly would end up battling Pedro's old nemesis, the Yankees, in the 2009 World Series, with Martinez losing Game 2 to New York's AJ Burnett before returning in Game 6 to surrender 4 runs in 4 innings, as the Yankees won the game and the series. It was a somewhat melancholy end to a legendary career, but given what he had endured the previous half-decade in relation to injuries, it was still impressive nonetheless. Since retiring, Martinez has been busy with everything from charitable projects in the Dominican Republic to penning his autobiography to making fairly regular analyst appearances on TV. He even worked as a special assistant to the general manager of the Red Sox, helping them win another World Series title in 2013. Senior Plunk was elected to the Hall of Fame in his first year of eligibility in 2015, with the Red Sox retiring his number 45 that same year. In the end, Pedro Martinez racked up 219 wins, 3,154 strikeouts, the most ever by a pitcher under 6 feet, and a 2.93 ERA. His 154 ERA Plus is the second highest all-time among pitchers with at least 2,500 innings pitched, behind just Clayton Kershaw at 157. He also won 3 Cy Young Awards, including 1 in each league, and made 8 All-Star teams. In an era dominated by performance-enhancing drugs, home run records, and oversized sluggers, it was a 5'11", 170-pound wiry Dominican hurler who dazzled, intimidated, and blew through opposing lineups with an ease that may never again be rivaled, as his performance in back-to-back seasons in 1999 and 2000 may well stand as the greatest seasons ever recorded by a pitcher. All of this and so much more than we could ever fit into one video is why we here at MTC believe we can confidently say there will never be another Pedro Martinez.
Derek Jeter was a leading man who happened to play baseball. He was Cary Grant in pinstripes, set to play his part on the biggest stage in the major leagues since he'd gotten drafted 6th overall by his favorite childhood team, and play his part he did, as one of the greatest hitting shortstops in MLB history. Today, he's 6th all-time with 3,465 hits, and his .310 batting average currently ranks in the top 100 at 88. His career WAR of 71.3 is 10th best ever among shortstops. He won 5 Silver Sluggers. Though he never won an MVP or batting title, he did have the game's best WAR in 1999 at 8.0, arguably an even more impressive feat given his beefy, roided-out competition of the era. But numbers don't really capture the true majesty of Jeter's greatness. There will never be another Derek Jeter for many reasons, but mostly because what Jeter possessed in abundance is a quality that has no numeric value. Derek Jeter was the epitome of clutch, racking up countless moments where he came through in the biggest spots imaginable, moments that will live on as long as baseball continues to exist. Spending his entire career in the Big Apple, where the spotlight can be blinding, Jeter, for 20 years, managed to embody all of the values we want to instill in future generations, and despite the fame and fortune, managed to maintain a poise and professionalism while carrying himself with a grace that made it very difficult to dislike him as a person. Jeter never tarnished his reputation or memories of his greatness. Was his last season one of his worst? Yeah, but he's still at 256. Sure, his OPS plus was 76, meaning he was about 25% below an average MLB player, but the year before he'd broken his ankle. Was that going to be our last memory of him, writhing in pain? No way. Derek Jeter deserved one last year as the captain, even if it was as a diminished one. Baseball is a sport with few living legends, and rightly so. The game grinds players into sawdust, yet Derek Jeter managed to rise above and occupy rarefied air, the likes of which will rarely ever come again. Will Bobby Witt Jr. play 20 years in KC? Will Gunnar Henderson play 20 years in Baltimore? Will either one of them become part of the American zeitgeist? A cultural touchstone that can be bigger than sports itself? That's unlikely. Baseball needed a hero following one of the darkest moments in our country's history in 2001. Derek Jeter was that guy. And for over a decade after that, he was so much more. But before all of that, he was a scrawny kid from Kalamazoo who just wanted to get picked by his favorite team. Draft day 1992. The little kid who'd grown up a Yankees fan because he spent his summers with his maternal grandparents in New Jersey had gotten selected 6th overall by that fabled organization. It was a fairy tale come true for young Derek. For the teams that had passed on the first high schooler taken, it was a nightmare. The Astros had the first pick, and one of their scouts was Hall of Fame pitcher Hal Newhouser, who'd seen Jeter play repeatedly and was convinced the kid would log 20 years in the big leagues. When the Astros took Phil Nevin instead, Newhouser quit the organization entirely. Paul Shuey, Billy Wallace, Jeffrey Hammonds, all taken ahead of Jeter. Then the Reds were up. They apparently wanted to take Derek, but ended up settling for the more established Chad Mottola, who was considered a more polished hitter coming out of UCF. Jeter had literally fell into the Yankees' lap. He signed for $800,000 and was off to play for his dream team. He then reported to Tampa and played in the Florida Gulf Coast League, where he probably went 0 for 14 with a lot of E6s mixed in. He ended up hitting just .202 with 10 doubles and 3 homers in 47 games. Then he got bumped up to A-ball for 11 contests, where he joined 2 teammates who would be with him for 5 rings, Andy Pettitte and Jorge Posada. The next season, Jeter committed 56 errors, still a record for the South Atlantic League, but he also hit .295. Jeter later wrote, "I was the king of robbing a player of a potential hit and then whipping it past first so the hitter wound up on second." His detractors would point to his defense for years to come following, but that bat was showing enough potential to keep the Yankees satisfied with his development. There was talks of moving him to center field if he couldn't iron out some of his fielding issues, but he managed to improve enough towards the end of the season to keep himself rooted up the middle for a little while longer. After crushing the minors in 1994, moving up 3 levels in the process while hitting .344 along the way, he got called up to the bigs in 1995 after a string of injuries decimated the Yankees' current infield. He started a couple games, went back down, then back up, then down again. He wouldn't play enough to make their postseason roster, the first Yankee appearance in the playoffs since 1981. Overall, Jeter had hit .250 in 15 games with 2 fielding errors, but the next season would bring with it the baseball world's first real introduction to who would eventually become the captain. But it wouldn't be immediate. As the 1996 season dawned, Jeter's place in the team was uncertain. His limited showing hadn't blown many away, and there was talk of bringing in a stopgap vet to let Jeter mature in the minors a bit longer. But there was also a new manager in town, Joe Torre, and he ended up liking Jeter's performance enough in spring that he named him the opening day starter up the middle. It proved to be a wise move. All Jeter did was win the Rookie of the Year by slashing .314, .370, .430 with 41 extra base hits, 14 steals, and 104 runs scored, helping the Yankees to their first AL East title since 1980. His flair for the dramatic was immediately apparent. His first walk-off hit came against the hated Red Sox on September 21st, and then, during the ALDS, he posted a .412 average as the Yankees advanced to the ALCS against the O's. And the legend of Jeter just kept growing, but he would need some help from a 12-year-old kid. In Game 1, the Yankees trailed 4-3 heading into the bottom of the 8th. Jeter had to face flamethrower Armando Benitez. Jeter, using the inside-out swing he perfected as a kid playing wiffle ball, tried to take advantage of the short porch and right on a 4-seamer away. Tony Tarasco went back, debated to make the catch at the wall, just a couple feet shy of a home run, but it was then that a baby-faced Jeffrey Meyer reached from the bleachers and the ball bounced off his glove and over the fence. Home run, the umpires ruled. No replay. It was now a tie game, which the Yankees, of course, went on to win. It was admittedly an egregious call looking back, but still one that sent Jeter hurtling towards Yankee immortality. New York would go on to take care of the O's, then came back down 2-0 to win the World Series against a formidable Braves team that featured one of the best starting rotations of all time. Jeter had hit .361 for the postseason as a whole, turning up huge time and time again, and it certainly wouldn't be the last time he did so. Before the 1997 season, Jeter turned down a contract worth $450,000 because he'd wanted $550. The Yankees threatened to renew him at $150, and thus began arguably Jeter's worst season at the plate between 1996 and 2009, where he would slash just .291, .370, .405, good for an OPS plus of just .103. This essentially had him ranked about average for an MLB hitter. The Yankees slumped as well, getting bounced by the Indians in the ALDS a year after winning it all. Jeter probably wanted to prove that his slight sophomore slump was a fluke, coming out in 1998 with a renewed purpose to go along with his already accelerating development. The Yankees surged to 114-48, the best mark in franchise history, and Jeter finished third in the AL MVP voting, hitting .324 with 19 dingers, 30 steals, and 203 hits. But it wasn't just on the field that a young Derek was leading. Said pitcher Derek Cohn, "We had a relentless nature where nobody gave way an at-bat, no matter what the score was," and that's who Derek was. He was also dating superstar singer Mariah Carey, which kept him in the tabloids, but he remained focused through it all. The consummate professional, whose BFF at the time was another MVP candidate in Alex Rodriguez, who would stay with Jeter when in Manhattan. This friendship wouldn't go on to age all that well, see my video on their brutal rivalry for more on that, but for the time being, it certainly contributed to his stature in the baseball world. The Yankees went on to sweep the Padres in the World Series that year, with Jeter hitting .353. Again, he'd proved himself to be at his best when he was most needed. It would be more of the same the next season, with the Yankees sweeping the Braves in the 1999 World Series. This capped off what was probably Derek's best season ever, with that aforementioned MLB leading 8.0 WAR and 219 hits, to go along with a career best OPS plus of 153 and 349 batting average. The good times kept rolling in 2000 for Derek. He started at short in the All-Star game for the first time and was the game's MVP, then proceeded to finish the year with a .339 average, 201 hits, 22 steals, and an .896 OPS. The Yankees stormed through the playoffs again, dispatching the Mariners and A-Rod, though both star shortstops hit 2 homers and drove in 5 during the ALCS. After beating the Mets in the only World Series ever between the two teams, the Yankees had successfully three-peated, cementing their run as one of the most dominant in MLB history, rivaling even the 1950s Yankee squads who seemingly won every season. Jeter more than did his part, batting .318 in the Fall Classic with 2 homers and 1,055 OPS. Jeter had won MVP of the World Series and the All-Star Game in the same season. It was the first time in MLB history that a player had ever earned that combo, but his career postseason heroics were far from over. 2001 was an emotional shock to the country, as Jeter's adopted hometown of New York was attacked by terrorists on 9/11. To make matters worse, Derek's sister Charlie was stricken with Hodgkin's disease and was undergoing chemotherapy as well. This backdrop of turmoil only made what Jeter did in the field even more poignant, especially his postseason heroics. During the regular season, Jeter had continued to sit comfortably in his prime, joining the 2020 club for the first time with 21 homers and 27 stolen bases, to go along with a tidy .311 batting average, 124 OPS+, and 5.2 WAR. As had become routine, the Yankees again won the AL East and went to the postseason hunting their 4th straight crown, making Oakland their next inevitable victim. But Jason Giambi and the A's had other plans. They made serious noise in NYC by taking the first 2 games of the ALCS, and then, back in Oakland for Game 3, the Bombers had a 1-0 lead that felt anything but safe in the thick of the steroid era. In the 7th, the A's were set to tie it up. Jeremy Giambi was on first when Terrence Long laced a double to right. Then, the throw into the infield was way offline. The Yankees would have to find a way to pull ahead in a tie contest. Right? Jeter said, not so fast. He was backing up a play in a manner that maybe 1 in 100 shortstops would have, racing all the way across the diamond to collect the errant toss and flip the ball to catcher Jorge Posada to nab a still upright Giambi by an eyelash. It was one of the most iconic defensive plays of his career, right up there with his jump throws and dives into the stands. The Yankees went on to win 3 in a row and return to the World Series. But on his last trip to Oakland before he retired, the A's showed a video tribute of Jeter, and quite amusingly, the flip wasn't included. As Johnny Damon said, he was always in the right place at the right time and made an incredible play for the ages, one that took the wind completely out of our sails. That year's World Series would be unlike any the Yankees had played, as they faced resiliency incarnate in the form of the recently added expansion franchise, Arizona Diamondbacks, who employed 2 of the best pitchers ever in Randy Johnson and Curt Schilling. The series would go 7, with the D-backs eventually rallying in one of the most iconic final moments in series history, but it was also during that series that Jeter earned his iconic nickname of Mr. November, as he had a walk-off homer in Game 4 just as the calendar flipped to November 1st. The game had actually started on October 31st, but had gone to extras. No World Series game had ever been played in November before, so it served as a hell of an introduction to that month's play. Sadly for him and his squad, it was really his only production of the series, as he batted .148 over the 7 total games. Little did anyone know that the Bronx Bombers' era of dominance was close to over, but Jeter himself was just getting started. Between 2001 and 2008, the Yankees won exactly 0 World Championships. Along the way, however, Derek was still Derek, hosting Saturday Night Live, appearing in Hollywood movies, dating Hollywood starlets, and above all else, producing at the plate. His lowest average over this span was .292, and aside from an injury-shortened 2003, his lowest hit total was a robust .179. The postseason heartbreaks for Yankees fans, however, came in bunches. In 2002, the Yankees got bounced by the Angels in the ALDS, though Jeter himself hit .500 with 2 homers. In 2003, the Yankees got to break the hearts of Red Sox fans again, with an Aaron Boone walk-off in the extra innings of Game 7. But then, Josh Beckett and the Marlins, down 2-1, won 3 straight to take the World Series, finishing them off at Yankee Stadium no less. Something had to be done, right? And something was. The Yankees traded for A-Rod in the offseason, and all of a sudden the bromance that had soured since small bickerments over the spotlight had separated the pair in the early 2000s became daily fodder for tabloid gossip. Jeter wasn't one to bask in the controversy. He was a boring interview, and he kept his personal life as private as he could. But with Alex's hefty contract and perhaps even weightier ego, Jeter found himself sucked into the media storm all too often. Even with arguably the American League greatest player being added, the Yankees still couldn't seem to punctuate successful years with championships. They suffered the infamy of the 2004 ALCS, becoming the first and only MLB team so far in baseball history to blow a 3-0 lead. And they did it to the hated Red Sox, no less, who would go on to end their 86-year slump following, then take the 2007 World Series as well. This made it, since 2001, 2 Oboe Sox in terms of championships. Not a great feeling for those in the Big Apple, who were very much used to winning over them. Perhaps the apex of the Yankees' struggles was 2008, when they didn't make the postseason at all, and had to watch their upstart AL East competitor Tampa Bay Rays clinch the pennant. Many fans were convinced that the reason the Yankees kept getting bounced out of the playoffs was because of clubhouse toxicity, with one of the chief examples being how their 2 superstar infielders were too busy catfighting the dugout to stay locked in when it mattered most. Perhaps the most famous on-field example of their tension was the drop ball of 2006, when A-Rod and Jeter collided in the infield on a pop-up that then dribbled into left field as the 2 superstars stood there, staring each other down. there was one iconic highlight during this time that would live on in the legacy of Derek because of just how gritty it showed he could be. In the 12th inning of a 2004 regular season hate match, with runners on first and second, Trot Nixon hit a bloop down the left field line that seemed like it was definitely going to drop fair and give the Red Sox the lead. Jeter went tearing after the ball, somehow managing to run it down in fair territory, and then went diving headfirst into the stands, emerging afterwards with a couple battle marks and the ball. The Yankees went on to win the game. The flip, meet the dive. Jeter couldn't have been happy with much of the previous decade, and in 2009, he took his revenge on the baseball world at large. At age 35, he slashed .334, .406, .465 with 30 steals, 212 hits, and a glittering 6.6 WAR total, the third highest total of his entire career. Only Honus Wagner has ever hit for a higher average as a shortstop over the age of 35. One reason Jeter had returned to the top was the renewed effort he had put into his own physical conditioning. In 2007, he began working with a personal trainer, getting up at 5:30 a.m. every day to train. Before, he didn't do anything in November or December, but as he aged, he realized the importance of keeping his body in tip-top shape year-round, and it certainly started paying off quickly. In the 2009 World Series, Jeter hit .407, and the Yankees dispatched the powerful Phillies in 6. Once the offseason began, the accolades absolutely rolled in. He won his 4th Gold Glove, his 4th Silver Slugger, and the Roberto Clemente Award for his humanitarian work. And for all the inevitable comments regarding this Gold Glove, keep in mind this season, he actually posted a career-high 1.1 D-WAR, making it perhaps the only season he may have actually deserved the award. During the campaign, he'd also passed Lou Gehrig for most hits as a Yankee, then passed Luis Aparicio for most hits as a shortstop in Major League history. He'd even been captain of Team USA during the World Baseball Classic, and afterwards, Commissioner Bud Selig had written him a letter. You've represented the sport magnificently throughout your Hall of Fame career. On and off the field, you're a man of great integrity, and you have my admiration. Even A's GM Billy Beane couldn't root against Jeter. Because of Jeter, the Yankees know how to win. It's not an act. The Yankees' brand name in this era is that it's Jeter's era. It's similar to what DiMaggio was in his time. This is probably the closest spiritual comp to Jeter. Joe DiMaggio, who still lives large in the psyche of American culture to this very day. By 2011, Jeter was back to hunting baseball immortality, closing in on the fabled 3,000 hit mark, a club with just 33 members out of more than 20,000 men who've played Major League Baseball. By mid-June, Jeter reached 2,994 hits, but then injured his calf chasing down a fly ball. He would miss the next 18 games, delaying baseball history for nearly a month. This is Derek Jeter we're talking about. He was always going to get his iconic hit in an epic way, right? And upon returning on July 9th in Yankee Stadium against the Tampa Bay Rays, Jeter started the game just 2 hits shy of the hollowed mark. Why not go 5 for 5? Even more than that, Jeter's 3,000th hit was a home run to tie the game against Tampa ace David Price, then one of the best in the game. And, just like that, Jeter became the first Yankee ever to join the 3,000th hit club. In 2012, Jeter had a resurgent campaign following a couple for his standard subpar years, leading the majors with 216 hits while slashing .316, .362, .429, helping lead the Yankees into the postseason for the 17th time out of the 18 years he played so far. The Bombers seemed ready to claim another title. They emerged victoriously versus the pesky Orioles in 5 games in the ALDS, with Jeter batting .364 along the way. Next up was the ALCS, and the MVP-winning Miguel Cabrera-led Tigers. The Yankees got down 4-0 in Game 1, but managed to tie it in the 9th, sending the game to extra innings. As it would end up, they probably would have been better off losing after 9, because in the 12th, while trying to field a grounder, Jeter broke his ankle. He screamed in pain, rolling on the infield dirt, before having to be helped off the field. The Yankees would go on to get swept. And, unfortunately, he was never quite the same player again. He missed most of 2013 as he recovered from the traumatic injury, playing in just 17 games in the process. Then, in 2014, when he was set to turn 40, while still playing a position that's the most athletically demanding on the field, he decided that it was nearing time to go and announced the campaign as his last dance. He appeared in that year's Midsummer Classic for the final time, lacing a double, and with every stop he made on the road, the opposing team gave him a special gift as a send-off. But it was Derek himself who probably saved the best for last for his beloved Yankee fans. It was September 25th in a game against the O's, tied at 5 in the bottom of the 9th with 2 runners on. This was Jeter's final home game. In his first debut in the Bronx in 1995, Jerry Seinfeld had impersonated Bob Shepard, as Jeter was announced coming to the plate. Unfortunately, Bob Shepard had died in 2010, but he'd recorded his Jeter intros, and thus, from the grave, the immortal PA announcer gave the final, now batting for the Yankees, number 2,
Derek Jeter.
Everyone and their mother seemed to know what was coming next, and the captain didn't disappoint. He used that iconic inside-out swing to lace a single to right field, giving the Yankees a walk-off win, and Jeter one of the most iconic final at-bats in baseball history. Curt Schilling probably summed up best what many players felt about Derek. I know competing against the guy, for the decade or so we matched up, was what made the major leagues for someone like me. Derek Jeter defined what it meant to be a big leaguer, not just as a player, but as a person. One reason that Jeter and A-Rod had beef was because A-Rod big-timed the low-level staffers who worked for the Yankees, which in Jeter's mind was taboo and something he himself would never consider doing. This seemed true of all of his professional relationships. The Yankee organization loved Derek and his presence with the team, always exuding professionalism and kindness to everyone involved. This is the legacy of Derek Jeter as much as his 3,465 hits, .310 batting average, 71.3 B-WAR, 544 doubles, and 200 club occupancy. This and his reputation as one of the greatest playoff performers of all time, with 5 World Series rings, a .302 career postseason average, and postseason record 200 hits, 111 runs scored, 32 doubles, and 302 total bases. All of this and so much more than we could ever hope to include in one video is why we here at MTC believe there will never be another Derek Jeter.
It's hard to know where to start with the baseball legend that was Tony Gwynn. So let's begin with the low point, or at least what qualifies as one for one of the best hitters who ever lived. April 14th, 1986. Gwynn and the Padres are facing their division rival LA Dodgers and all-star hurler Bob Welch. Welch is dealing. He strikes out Gwynn in the first inning, the third inning, and again in the fifth inning. 3 Ks and 3 at-bats. To say that this is an unusual experience for Gwynn is an understatement, but he doesn't give up. He singles off Welch in the 8th and then scores the winning run in the 10th. The Padres win 4-3 thanks in large part to Gwynn, who's actually just played one of the worst games of what would be his 20-year career. Why was it such a bad game for Gwynn? Well, he struck out 3 times. That happens to pretty much every big league hitter, especially these days, but it only happened that one time to Gwynn. Just that once. That's right, Tony Gwynn, who played more than 2,400 Major League Baseball games, and only in that April game against Bob Welch and the Dodgers, struck out more than 3 times at the plate. It's almost impossible to wrap your head around. Over the years, Gwynn's approach to the plate became a matter of legend. It started with his vision, which he claimed was 2015. Gwynn could simply see things that other hitters couldn't, like a pitcher gripping a split-fingered fastball in his glove. But because of his sharp eye, quick bat, great hands, and prodigious preparation, Gwynn hardly ever struck out. In fact, he never struck out more than 40 times in any season. He struck out only 188 times during the entire 1990s. By comparison, Shohei Ohtani struck out 189 times in 2021, during his MVP season. Gwynn had such low strikeout totals in large part because no one was better at hitting with 2 strikes. Amazingly, he finished his career batting .302 in those counts, the best mark for any player since pitch count records began being tracked. The second highest average with 2 strikes behind Gwynn, Wade Boggs all the way down at .262. How hard was it to face Tony Gwynn? Well, chew on this. Gwynn and Hall of Famer Greg Maddux faced off 107 times during their careers. Maddux struck out 3,371 batters during his playing days, but he never struck out Tony Gwynn. Never. Not once. Maddux liked to say that if a pitcher can change speeds, every hitter is helpless, limited by human vision. Except for that beat Tony Gwynn. Anthony Keith Gwynn grew up in Southern California, the son of a warehouse manager and a postal worker. Gwynn and his 2 brothers played baseball almost constantly, and his younger brother Chris would become a major leaguer as well. Tony was a multi-sport star in high school in Long Beach, and played both baseball and basketball in college at San Diego State. He had over 400 in both his junior and senior years in college. In the spring of his senior year with the Aztecs, Gwynn had 16 points and 16 assists in his final basketball game, and then, 2 days later, joined the baseball team and went 3 for 7 in a doubleheader, with the game-winning RBI in both games. In 1981, Gwynn was drafted professionally by both the San Diego Padres and the then San Diego Clippers of the NBA. Gwynn chose baseball and immediately blew away the competition in the minors, hitting a jaw-dropping .462 in 23 games in AA to close out the season. The following year, Gwynn dominated on his way to a .328 average at AAA Hawaii before being called up to make his major league debut on July 19, 1982. In that game, the 22-year-old Gwynn went 2 for 4 with an RBI against the Phillies, going on to finish his first big league season with a .289 average. It would be the only year in his 20-year career that he would fail to hit 300, and it wasn't even a full season. In 1983, Gwynn hit .309 in 86 games as a part-time player. But in 1984, when the Padres finally put him into the starting lineup for good, Gwynn feasted on NL pitching, helping San Diego make the playoffs for the first time in franchise history. In that first full big league season, Gwynn hit .351, winning the first of his 8 batting titles and earning his first of 15 All-Star selections. He even stole 33 bases. Gwynn was just as good in the playoffs, hitting .368 to lead the Padres over the Cubs in the NLCS before they fell to the juggernaut Detroit Tigers in the World Series. Hitting .351 at the age of 24 was no accident for Gwynn. It was the fruit of hours of preparation, both in the batting cage and in the tape room. Decades before big league hitters each had iPads stocked with video footage and analysis of at-bats, pitchers, hitting mechanics, and baseball savant data, Gwynn recorded his games at home on his VCR to study his ABs afterwards. He took his video cassette library on the road with him in a suitcase, so he could study in hotel rooms too. His teammates jokingly called him Captain Video. Eventually, Gwynn paid $85,000 of his own money to help the Padres install a then state-of-the-art video room in their clubhouse, so those skeptical teammates could have access to the same film he had been benefiting from. Gwynn's resulting baseball IQ was off the charts. No one in baseball knew his swing, the opposing pitchers, the defense, or even the umpires better than Gwynn. He knew pitchers' tendencies so well that even when his teammates had stolen the opposing team's signs, he refused to be told what was coming. And it wasn't just his own swing he knew. Once, when outfielder Al Martin joined the Padres, he started hitting the ball to the opposite field with power as he utilized a new open stance at the plate. He couldn't figure out what was going on, but Gwynn knew, and showed him exactly why it was happening. And by 1985, Tony Gwynn and his thousands of hours of preparation were only getting warmed up. It will be hard for anyone to follow up a year in which they hit .351 as Gwynn did in 1984, but Gwynn did post another strong season in 1985, hitting .317 with 197 hits and earning another All-Star appearance. He was well on his way to dominating the NL during the 1980s. He got even better in 1986, hitting .329 with the league-leading 211 hits and 107 runs. He also won his first of 5 Gold Glove awards. His 135 OPS Plus nearly reached 1984's mark of 141. Then, in 1987, the 27-year-old Gwynn took things to a whole other level. He won his second career batting title with a .370 average, while leading the league with 218 hits, scoring 119 runs, and stealing a career-high 56 bases. Somehow, he finished 8th in the NL MVP award, despite leading the league in a WAR at 8.6. Tony would go on to win the batting title in 1988 and 1989 as well, 3 in a row. He was rapidly becoming one of the greatest hitters in the history of baseball. Sure, Gwynn didn't hit for power, but he hit for precision, better than just about anyone. Oral Hershiser once said of him that it sometimes feels like he has a steering wheel on his bat, and he could put the ball exactly where he wanted. This was in part because of his aforementioned preparation, and also in part because he had such phenomenal bat control. Some of this was due to the fact he used a small, light bat, which allowed him to wait back as long as possible before committing to a pitch. As a result, Tony rarely got caught in his front foot, and hardly ever made weak contact in the air, the true death sentence of a batted ball. During his first 4 years in the 1990s, Tony did not win another batting title, though he hit an impressive .324 in that time period, including a .358 average in 1993. Andres Galarraga won the batting title that season with a .370 mark, in a, well, shall we say, generous Coors Field. Then came 1994. Gwynn, now 34, launched himself towards history. After 110 games, Gwynn was hitting .394. No major leaguer had hit .400 since Ted Williams hit .406 in 1941. His OPS Plus so far, 169. His OBP, over .450. But, alas, his chase for .400 and his first MVP award was cut short. A labor strike by the Major League Baseball Players Union ended the season early. It was devastating and remains one of the greatest what-ifs in baseball history. Could Gwynn have hit above this prestigious mark? It's hard to say, but he was on fire when the strike hit, batting .423 during the second half of that season. And if any modern hitter had the skill set to do so, it was Tony. By the way, in 1994, Gwynn hit an otherworldly .397 in 2 strike counts. That was literally better than his already insane batting average in hitters' counts. And believe it or not, he also used 1 bat for most of the season. Gwynn was extremely serious about the bats he used, and he took very good care of them. He even liked to visit the factory where his bats were made, so he could hand-pick the billets of wood. He famously could close his eyes and identify his bat from any one of his teammates, just by its feel. Although he never reached the heights of hitting .394 again, Gwynn just seemed to get better and better as he got older, adding 3 more consecutive batting titles between 1995 and 1997, hitting a mind-numbing .368, .353, and .372 respectively over those seasons, while registering an OPS Plus over 130 and nearly 200 hits a year. In summary, Gwynn hit higher than .350 for 5 consecutive seasons during the 1990s, and did so in his mid-30s. He became the first National Leaguer to win 4 straight batting titles. His 8 career batting titles are the most in NL history, and he won the last of those at age 37. Finally, Tony Gwynn started to show signs of his age in 1998. His WAR slipped to 1.5 due to his poor fielding metrics, even though he still managed a .321 average, good enough for 9th in the league. After knocking off the Astros and the Braves in the playoffs, Gwynn and the Padres finally returned to the World Series, where they faced another AL powerhouse, this time the New York Yankees, in the middle of one of the sporting world's all-time dynasties. Gwynn rose to the occasion, launching a pitch from David Wells off the facade of the upper deck at Yankee Stadium in the 5th inning of Game 1. Gwynn would later call it the most exciting moment of his career. The Yankees unfortunately would end up sweeping the Padres, but Gwynn still hit .500 in the series with 8 hits. It
turned out that 1998 was Gwynn's final full season, but he closed out his career with some big moments regardless, including his 3,000th hit on August 6, 1999 in Montreal, a first-inning single. Only Wade Boggs reached 3,000 hits and fewer at-bats than Gwynn did. When asked where he wanted his 3,000th hit to go, he said he wanted it to be a hard ground ball between shortstop and third base, or the 5-5 hole as he called it. That's where he made his living. Gwynn hit so many balls through that hole that he even wrote 5-5 on the tongue of his shoes as a daily reminder. He instead ended up with a line drive to right center, a perfect encapsulation of his line drive approach solidified throughout his iconic career. Because of injuries, Gwynn played just 36 games in 2000 and 71 in 2001, his final season. That last year, he hit .324 with the 127 OPS+. 5 years later, he was a first ballot Hall of Famer, with an impeccable legacy that included 15 All-Star appearances, a .338 career average, and of course the 8 batting titles, tied for the most in NL history. Despite what he meant on the field, Tony arguably meant even more to San Diego. Not only did he attend college at San Diego State and spend his entire 20-year career with the Padres when he had plenty of chances to play for a different franchise, he returned to his alma mater to coach after his playing days were over. Tony Gwynn never complained or demanded a trade. He just turned up every day at the ballpark and hit, and then stayed long after others had left to watch the tape. Sadly, Gwynn died in 2014 after a battle with cancer, but he left a legacy behind him that still resonates today, as cerebral hitters everywhere continue to look to him as the modern example of a true pure hitter. That begs the question, was Tony Gwynn indeed the best hitter who ever lived, at least as we said, cerebrally? I think he definitely belongs in the conversation, even if we today have become more enamored with power and slugging numbers. So, what's the case for Gwynn? First, he hit over 300 every full season of his career, over nearly 2 decades. We also talked about the lack of strikeouts, but perhaps didn't go into enough detail on how truly rare it was for him to K. He never did so more than 40 times in any season, and he averaged just 21 strikeouts per year. But it wasn't just a low K rate. Gwynn, as we said, never struck out against Greg Maddux, but he did do something else against the one man who had the pitching IQ to match Gwynn's hitting IQ. He hit .415 against the 4-time Cy Young winner and Hall of Famer. Nobody else on the planet hit Maddux like that. No one. And Maddux wasn't the only star pitcher that Gwynn torched in his career. He also hit at least 300 against Tom Glavine, Nolan Ryan, and John Smoltz, just to name a few. Over his career, Gwynn faced 18 Hall of Fame pitchers for a total of 541 plate appearances, basically an entire season's worth of at-bats against just Hall of Fame level talent. So, how did Gwynn do against the best the game had to offer? He hit .331. Oh, and Gwynn also hit .371 in 9 World Series games. And don't forget, most of the time, Gwynn didn't have anyone good to protect him in the Padre lineup. While his contemporary Wade Boggs had guys like Jim Rice, Dwight Evans, and Bill Buckner coming up behind him and forcing pitchers to confront him, Tony Gwynn was surrounded by the likes of Rob Deere, Marvell Wynn, and Archie Cianfrocco. It didn't matter, the guy could flat out hit. All of this, and more than we could ever describe, is why we here at MTC believe we can confidently say there will never be another Tony Gwynn. There have been a lot of smart players in baseball history. Some were known for their intellectual feats off the field. Mets pitcher Ron Darling, for example, attended Yale. Catcher Mo Berg served as an undercover spy for the CIA during the Second World War. Reggie Jackson was rumored to have an IQ of 160, though Reggie himself might have started that rumor. Others were known as exceptional students of the game. Tony Gwynn and Ted Williams turned hitting into a science with their relentless pursuit of perfection. But perhaps no ball player's ever been revered for his genius as much as the professor himself, Hall of Fame pitcher Greg Maddux. Sure, this was partly because Maddux looked the part. From his eyeglasses to his wiry, seemingly unathletic physique, the right-hander appeared as if he belonged in a public library or at an accountant's convention, not in the mound pitching against the Yankees in Game 1 of the World Series. Beneath the unassuming, somewhat nerdy physique, however, Greg Maddux was a freak of nature, and whatever he lacked in physical advantages he made up for and then some with his ability to identify an opposing batter's weak spots and exploit them. The result was a career that included 4 Cy Young Awards, 4 ERA titles, 8 All-Star appearances, 18 Gold Glove Awards, and more than 3,000 strikeouts, 300 victories, and 5,000 innings pitched. For 4 unforgettable years in the 1990s, which was one of the best decades for hitters in baseball history, Maddux posted a 1.98 ERA. He was head and shoulders above most of his pitching peers, and it was because of the head on those shoulders. So, let's dig into why there'll never be another Greg Maddux. Maddux's father was in the Air Force, so young Greg grew up all over the place, ranging from homes as far apart as Texas to Spain. But baseball was one constant for both him and his older brother Mike. Eventually, the Maddux family landed in Las Vegas permanently, where his brother would get drafted by the Phillies and Greg would lead Valley High School to a state championship on the mound.
Maddox at the time had a slender build and relied on late movement and a good 12-6 curveball to get hitters out. He didn't exactly turn heads with his velocity, but scouts didn't view him as a soft tosser early in his career either, just a pitcher with roughly average velocity who was on his way up and would hopefully gain some oomph eventually to go along with his control and movement. He was still scraping 90 on many of his offerings after all. Maddox was drafted in the second round by the Chicago Cubs in 1984, with him deciding to accept the bonus they offered and pass on college at Arizona. He put that bonus money away in the bank and lived off his minor league salary and the money he earned from off-season jobs at Sears and Wendy's. Greg worked his way through the minors in 1984 and 85, earning a call-up with the Cubs in September 1986 when he was still just 20. His major league debut was unusual. He was called on in the 18th inning of a marathon game against the Astros. It wouldn't be the best debut in history. He gave up a run and got the loss, but 4 days later he got his first start and earned a complete game victory over the Reds. In his last start of the season, he pitched against his brother Mike, a starter for the Phillies, and beat him. Aside from these highlights, a 5.52 ERA denoted a pitcher in need of experience and more than a little seasoning. 1987 was about as rough. In his first full season in the majors, Maddox was extremely wild, a crazy thought now looking back for sure, as his walk rate was an astronomical 4.3 per 9. His ERA of 5.61 was the worst in the National League, and his 76 ERA plus made him 24% worse than an average big league pitcher. He was even shipped back to the minors mid-season to help him get his head on straight. It didn't seem to help much, however. In the last 6 weeks of the season, the Cubs lost all 7 of Maddox's starts, with opponents hitting .347 against him. After that disastrous season, Maddox and his brother played winter ball in Venezuela together. Greg focused on improving his curveball, getting more grounders overall, and building his confidence. At this point, his circle changeup, a pitch that would come to be of the utmost importance to him, hadn't even made an impact yet. That offseason of obsessively working had a major effect. Maddox exploded out of the gate in 1988, earning his first All-Star appearance. He won 18 games, had a .318 ERA, and an above-average 1.14 ERA+. This was also the first year of a truly incredible streak, even if it's seemingly less so by today's standards. For the next 17 years, Maddox would win 15 or more games every single season. That's something no pitcher has ever done, or likely ever will do again. In 1989, he was even better, winning 19 games with a 2.95 ERA, finishing third in the NL Cy Young race. He also helped lead the Cubs to the National League Championship Series against the San Francisco Giants. But in that series, the Giants shelled Maddox, who gave up 8 runs, and they would go on to beat the Cubs and advance to the World Series. Maddox won a respectable 15 games in both 1990 and 1991, earning his first 2 Gold Gloves along the way while posting ERA pluses of 119 and 116 respectively. At this point, Maddox was more of a truly solid pitcher than an all-timer, as he was known as an innings eater who could consistently outperform his FIP, fielding independent pitching. But then, 1992 rolled around. Maddox started the year accumulating 10 wins by early July and being selected for his second All-Star game. At the break, he had a .240 ERA and 4 complete games. But here's the crazy thing. He only got better as the year wore on. In his final 16 starts after the All-Star break, Maddox logged a dazzling 1.93 ERA, throwing 5 complete games to go along with a nearly 3-to-1 strikeout-to-walk ratio. He finished the year with 20 wins, a 2.18 ERA, and a league-leading 1.66 ERA+, beating out Atlanta ace Tom Glavine to win his first Cy Young Award. This wouldn't be the last time Maddox and Glavine's name would be mentioned in the same breath, however. After the 92 season, Maddox became a free agent for the first time in his career. The Yankees looked like the frontrunners to land him, but apparently Greg turned down their offer of $34 million to take $28 million from the Braves. He thought that Atlanta would be a better place to raise a family than New York, and that it would be enriching to work alongside a staff that included John Smoltz, Steve Avery, and the aforementioned Glavine. As fate would have it, Maddox's first start in a Braves uniform came against his former club at Wrigley Field. Cubs fans treated Maddox to a chorus of boos, and then he treated them to a shutout. By the time he joined the Braves, Maddox was already regarded as the smartest pitcher in baseball. He studied videotape of hitters constantly, looking for weak spots and devising plans on how to best get them out. He even watched them take warm-up swings. Maddox now relied on a refined repertoire that included a curveball, circle change, slider, two-seamer, and four-seam fastball. None of these pitches profiled as truly elite, aside from his two-seamer at times, but his preparation, change of speeds, and immaculate control allowed him to set up hitters like no other, and keep them off balance consistently. In Atlanta, Maddox was also joining a team that had won the last 2 NL pennants and boasted the aforementioned extremely impressive rotation. The Braves would indeed give up the fewest runs in the league in 1993 en route to winning 104 games, with new arrival Maddox again being dominant, winning 20 games and leading the league with 267 innings and an ERA of 2.36. He would also receive his second straight Cy Young Award. Unfortunately, Maddox again faltered in the postseason. After helping the Braves to victory in Game 2 of the NLCS against Philadelphia, he gave up 6 runs in Game 6, and the Phillies beat the Braves to advance to the World Series. The baseball strike ended the 1994 season early, but prior to that, Greg Maddux was on his way to one of the greatest seasons any pitcher had enjoyed in decades. Maddux had dominated the league for the past few seasons, but in 1994, he absolutely destroyed it. Before the season was halted, Maddux had an almost unfathomable 1.56 ERA and more than 200 innings. 1.56. In 25 starts, he won 16 games and had 10 complete games, and his control was simply superhuman. He walked only 31 batters versus 156 strikeouts. He also posted a 2.71 ERA+, meaning he was almost 3 times better than an average big league pitcher. By the numbers, the chasm between Maddux and the rest of the league was greater than it had even been for Bob Gibson in 1968 when he had a 1.12 ERA and an ERA+ of 2.58. Not surprisingly, Maddux won his 3rd straight Cy Young. But here's what's crazy, Maddux was arguably even better when play resumed in 1995. That year, Maddux went 19-2 with a minuscule 1.63 ERA and over 200 innings again. He threw another 10 complete games, walking just 23 batters all season. His strikeout to walk ratio and whip of 0.811 were even lower than they had been in 1994. His ERA plus was only 11 points worse at 2.60. Sports writers were now discussing him being the best right-handed pitcher since Walter Johnson. Unsurprisingly, Maddux won a 4th Cy Young in a row, while finishing 3rd in MVP voting. This would also be the season he would finally get over the hump in the playoffs and make it to his first World Series. Maddux started Game 1 against Orel Hershiser and the Cleveland Indians. The first batter he would face, Kenny Lofton, would reach base on an error, eventually coming around to score. After that, Maddux shut the Indians down completely, throwing a 2-hit complete game on just 95 pitches. The Braves went on to win the series in 6 games, capturing their first World Series title in Atlanta. Maddux, now 30, returned back to earth a bit in 1996, at least relatively speaking. After all, most pitchers would have killed for the 2.72 ERA and 160 ERA plus he posted that year. These less than astounding numbers meant he would fail to repeat as Cy Young for the 5th year in a row. Regardless, he would again find success in the postseason, helping the Braves return to the World Series, where he pitched 8 scoreless innings in Game 2 against the Yankees. He would be the losing pitcher, however, in Game 6, as the burgeoning dynasty that would come to define the 90s claimed the first of 4 World Series titles they would win in the next 5 years. Maddux returned to form in the 1997 season with a record of 19-4, a 2.20 ERA, and a 1.89 ERA+. In more than 230 innings, he walked just 20 batters. He would also lead the league in home run rate for the 4th time in his career up to this point, at a minuscule 0.3 per 9. This year also contained perhaps the most iconic game he would ever pitch. Facing his old team, the Cubs, in the first game of a July doubleheader, Maddux took his command to a new level. The professor needed just 78 pitches, shout out Foolish Baseball, that afternoon to beat the Cubs in a complete game masterpiece that took just 2 hours and 7 minutes. Maddux allowed 0 runs and did not walk a batter while striking out 6. He started 26 of the 31 batters he faced with strikes, and only 2 Chicago batters even reached a 2-ball count. Nowadays, if a pitcher throws a complete game shutout in fewer than 100 pitches, it's known as a Maddux, in large part due to this specific game. Maddux would remain one of the top pitchers in the majors throughout the rest of the decade, finishing every season in the top 5 of the Cy Young voting while posting at least 15 wins with an ERA under or near 3 every season except 1999, when he had an ERA of 3.57. During this streak, he would also exceed a 1.40 ERA plus every year except that same 99 season. It was also in this year that the Yankees beat the Braves again in the World Series. Maddux pitched the opening game and carried a 1-0 lead into the 8th inning before giving up 4 runs. The Braves ended up getting swept. This was part of the overall narrative of Greg's career. He always seemed to pitch well in the postseason with a 3.27 ERA and nearly 200 postseason innings, but he was never nearly as dominant as he was during the regular season. During the early 2000s, Maddux was no longer winning Cy Youngs or posting WARs above 9, but he was still getting batters out and racking up wins, innings, and Gold Glove awards. In 2001, Maddux even set a National League record by throwing 72 1/3 straight innings without a walk. The streak was snapped by an intentional walk. At the end of the 2003 season, Maddux again became a free agent, and after a mind-blowingly successful decade in Atlanta, he elected to return to the Cubs on a 3-year, $24 million contract. And after heading back to the city where he had started his career, Maddux began notching some pretty major pitching milestones. In that same Cubs uniform again, Maddux won 16 games in 2004 at age 38. However, his ERA swelled to 4.02, the first time his ERA had been above 4 since his first full season in Chicago back in 1987. Regardless, that August he earned his 300th career victory with an 8-4 win over the Giants. This made him just one of 24 pitchers in history to achieve that mark, and perhaps one of the last. The following season, Maddox crossed another historic barrier, notching his 3,000th career strikeout. Maddox is one of only 10 pitchers in history to have at least 300 wins and 3,000 career punchouts in a career. His ERA was again over 4, however, now at 4.24. The professor's class was nearly out. He managed to hang on for a few more seasons, having stints in both Los Angeles and San Diego. While he wasn't particularly effective, he was working at this point with the low to mid-80s fastball, and still surviving enough to give decent inning totals. Maddox's last game would be in relief for the Dodgers in the final game of the 2008 National League Championship Series. Greg Maddux never had Nolan Ryan's fastball, or Pedro Martinez's changeup, or Randy Johnson's slider. His heater topped out at 88 to 90 miles per hour, and at 6 feet 170 pounds, he had to be one of the least physically intimidating pitchers of that time period. So, how did Maddux become the best pitcher in baseball for years in the 1990s, an era known for its juiced hitters? What made him so special? Maddux once told a reporter that it's not a speed contest, it's a pitching contest. And that's what Maddux knew so well, the true science of pitching a baseball. That knowledge earned him nicknames such as Mad Dog and the Professor, but Maddux really was a magician, whose sleight of hand on the mound seemed to alter the fabric of how the game is played. This sleight of hand can be broken down into 5 central components. Number 1. Delayed movement. As we said, Maddux didn't have an excess of velocity, but he did have phenomenal late movement. One of Maddox's best pitches was the backup slider after all, a notoriously hard pitch for righties to throw consistently. It would look like an inside pitch designed to back a right-handed batter up, and then at the last split second it would break across the inside corner. Oh, and he could also throw a front door two-seamer that could do the same thing to left-handed batters. Number 2. The control. To make the most of the late-breaking action on his pitches, Maddux needed incredible control. He used to say that the best pitch in baseball is a well-located fastball. An accurate fastball sets up everything else after all. And he could indeed throw his two-seamer pretty much wherever he wanted, which was especially useful in the 90s when strike zones were seemingly bigger than ever. He would take an inch off the edge, and if the ump gave it to him, he'd keep getting further away. Number 3. The pitch arsenal. It wasn't just the fastball Maddux could control after all. He could throw every pitch in his arsenal, his circle change, his curve, his slider, his four-seamer, perfectly in the center of the smallest of targets, while also changing speeds in subtle ways to both frustrate hitters and throw off their balance. Number 4. Intuition. There were times when it seemed like Maddux didn't just have control over the mound, but over reality itself. For example, one time Braves manager Bobby Cox visited Maddux on the mound with runners on first and third and 2 outs. He suggested that Maddux intentionally walk the batter. Maddux told Cox that his plan was to get the batter to hit a foul pop-up to third base on the 3rd pitch. Cox returned to the dugout, and Maddux somehow managed to do exactly that. The history of Maddux is littered with stories like this. Here's another. Apparently he once told center fielder Otis Nixon to move back and to stand just on the edge of the warning track and not move a muscle. The batter hit a ball directly at Nixon, who then told reporters the story, noting that he barely even had to move his glove to catch it. Number 5. The mental edge. Part of Maddox's hold on reality was in his preparation. He was able to read hitters and exploit their weaknesses, then file that information away for future use. If Maddux struck you out in April, he'd remember exactly the pitch sequence he had used so they could get you out again in September. There were also smaller, more subtle things that added up and made Maddux even more impressive than your average hurler. While many pitchers waste a pitch trying to get a batter to chase on an 0-2, Maddux would instead attempt to throw a strike that would induce weak contact, almost as if the count was still 0-1. He might not have gotten the strikeout, but he would get the out overall, and throw fewer pitches doing it. Another thing that Maddux said that he did in order to get a mental edge on certain hitters was to let them have some success against him, usually in a spring training game or in a situation where his team had a comfortable lead. That's right, he would intentionally help hitters grow overconfident against him so that when they faced each other in a more meaningful situation in the future, he had the upper hand. Maddux also believed in what he called stealing strikes. He would study which batters would let him get away with the first pitch strike in certain situations. He said there are several circumstances in a game where a batter will just give you a strike, and you have to take every opportunity to exploit that when you can. Greg Maddux retired in 2008 as one of the best right-handed pitchers in the history of the game, being elected to the Hall of Fame on his first ballot. His number 31 has been retired by both the Cubs and the Braves. What's more, his career totals that he spent 23 years accumulating are absolutely nuts, and likely will never be reached again. 355 career wins, the most of any modern pitcher since Warren Spahn, 5,000 innings pitched, 18 Gold Gloves, including 13 in a row, and a streak of 4 consecutive Cy Youngs at one point. That's why we at MTC believe we can confidently say there'll never be another Greg Maddux. Adrian Beltre never won a World Series in his 21 big league seasons. He never won a single MVP award, nor did he win a batting title or ever lead the league in RBIs, OPS, or really any offensive category. He led the league in home runs only once, pretty much as a fluke. He made only 4 All-Star games, and yet, Adrian Beltre is undoubtedly one of the best and most unique third basemen ever to play the game. A player who registered over 3,000 hits, nearly 500 home runs, and racked up more than 200 defensive runs saved, nearly all tallied at the hot corner. He still holds the big league record for that, by the way. A player whose big league career started as a teenager, but who really didn't find any consistency until his 30s. Oh, and a player who's one of the most fun and beloved characters ever to step foot on a baseball field. So, it's time to pay homage to a man who brought joy to countless fans, teammates, and even opposing players. It's time to step up to the plate and detail why there will never again be another player like Adrian Beltre. Just don't touch his head. Adrian Beltre didn't look destined for greatness for most of his life. He was a scrawny kid who grew up poor in the Dominican Republic. He loved sports as a teenager, especially tennis and basketball, but it was when he saw the Houston Astros all-star third baseman Ken Caminiti play on television when he was 12 that Beltre knew what sport he wanted to pursue and how he wanted to play it. Beltre weighed just 130 pounds as a teenager, but despite this, he did have a rocket for an arm and a smooth hitting stroke that showed promise to deliver power as he filled out. After a Dodger scout happened upon him at 15, he was promptly signed for just $23,000. As he progressed through the minors, Beltre did grow in size and strength rapidly, managing to make his major league debut with the Dodgers just 4 years later. The Dodgers had just traded away Hall of Fame catcher Mike Piazza to the New York Mets, and one of the players they'd received in return, third baseman Bobby Bonilla, had just gone down with an intestinal infection, and so the Dodgers called him their 19-year-old prospect to step in. Beltre's first major league at-bat came against the Angels' Chuck Finley, and he wasted no time, roping a line drive RBI double down the line for his first big league knock. Despite this audacious start, Beltre would go on to look a bit overmatched that season, finishing his first year with just a .215 batting average and 7 home runs in 77 games. He would improve in 1999, enough to earn a starting job at third base, managing to put up a .275 average with 15 homers and an above-average 102 OPS+. He improved again in 2000, hitting .290 with 20 home runs and a 114 OPS+. Still just 22, Beltre had shown steady, incremental improvement. He was now considered a plus defender who could challenge for a Gold Glove soon, but still not an elite presence in the box overall, more of a solid regular than an all-star. But instead of taking a leap forward in 2001, he found himself not just fighting for his job, but his life. That winter, Beltre had undergone an emergency appendectomy back home in the Dominican Republic. His appendix had burst, and a botched operation left him with a serious infection. He lost 15 pounds, and while other players were still reporting to spring training, Beltre was attached to an IV. Adrian returned in May, but still wasn't 100%, taking a noticeable step back at the plate with a 91 OPS+, his worst mark since his rookie season. His woes continued the following 2 full seasons, with him posting below-average marks of 97 and 88 in 2002 and 2003, with just 44 combined home runs those years. Even with the invention of DRS in 2003, Beltre registered 25 that first season. The Dodgers had started to grow impatient. Critics called him fat. The Los Angeles Times wrote that he was a 5 o'clock hitter, a player who could dazzle in batting practice but never translate that ability into games. At age 24, Beltre looked destined to become just another glove-first liability at the plate, perhaps even needing to move to a utility role in the upcoming seasons just to stay in the big leagues. Beltre knew he had a lot to prove in 2004. It was a contract year, and it was make or break time for his starting position at the hot corner. And boy oh boy did he answer the call. During the first week of the season, he hit .478 with 3 homers, and he just kept going from there. By the All-Star break, he was hitting .315 with 22 home runs, and playing truly incredible defense. Yet, he still didn't make the All-Star team. That snub just fueled Beltre's fire. He ended that season with a .334 average, an OPS of 1,017, as well as a league-leading 48 home runs to go with 121 RBIs, 104 runs, and 200 hits. His OPS sat at an astronomical 163. The only player to have a higher WAR than Beltre's 9.6 was Barry Bonds. Beltre's career season resulted in a huge, at the time, 5-year, $64 million deal with the Seattle Mariners. But things wouldn't stay so rosy for Adrian over the course of the deal. Not only did his team miss the playoffs every year, but Beltre performed much like a mortal in every one of his campaigns with them. In 2005, he hit just .255 with 19 homers. He improved slightly to .258 with 25 homers in 2006, but still, there were rumblings of disappointment in Seattle, where press and fans alike were calling him a colossal free agent bust. The only thing he was really exceptional at this point involved his glove after all, as he was routinely posting top 5 defensive metrics at third. But he wasn't signed just for his glove. In 2007, he had perhaps his best season with the Mariners, hitting .276 with 26 home runs and 99 RBIs, as well as receiving a long overdue first Gold Glove award. However, his OPS Plus was still just 12 points above average at 112. Beltre managed a similar season in 2008, with 25 homers, 77 RBIs, and a .266 average, as well as a second Gold Glove award. His defense was better than ever, and his 3.1 defensive WAR was the best in the majors, but Beltre's hitting in Seattle had never gotten close to what he'd accomplished that that last year in Los Angeles. His final season in Seattle in 2009 was his worst overall. He missed more than a month after getting a bone spur removed in his right shoulder. Then he experienced one of the most painful injuries a ball player can undergo, suffering a ruptured testicle when a hard grounder caught him in the groin. Beltre was not wearing a cup and still didn't wear one after the injury. He finished his final season in Seattle with 8 home runs, a 683 OPS, a 379 slugging percentage, and just an 83 OPS plus. In his 5 years as a Mariner, Beltre averaged just 20 homers, a 266 average, and a mediocre 317 OBP. He hadn't managed to eclipse even 26 dingers once, and he was now 30 years old, with his best years presumably behind him. But it was then, in the midst of his struggles, that Beltre realized something. He needed to stop taking everything so seriously. It was time to be himself and have some fun. This was the moment that everything would change for Adrian. The underperforming Beltre signed a 1-year, $9 million deal with the Boston Red Sox before the 2010 season. It was a flyer essentially, his last real chance at a starting job, and the Red Sox immediately saw a big return on their investment. That season Beltre exploded at the plate, posting a 321 average, a 919 OPS, and a 141 OPS plus, best since that fateful season in 2004. With the help of the Green Monster, he launched a league-leading 49 doubles, and also hit 28 home runs. He was named to his first All-Star team ever, and finished the year with an incredible 7.8 WAR. But this was just the beginning. Thanks to his big season with the Red Sox, Beltre inked a 6-year, $96 million deal with the Texas Rangers, who were coming off their first World Series appearance in franchise history. It was a controversial move at the time, with many Rangers fans being worried that their team was about to get the same production the Mariners had for the preceding half a decade. But Beltre put all these doubts to rest in his first season with the Rangers. 2011 would see Beltre start in his first All-Star game ever after a red-hot beginning to the year, and then, despite missing 6 weeks in the second half of the season with a hamstring injury, still posted a 296 average with 32 home runs and a 131 OPS plus, just shy of his 2010 mark. His defense continued to be spectacular as well, with him earning another Gold Glove for his efforts. The Rangers won 96 games and made the playoffs for a second straight season. Thanks to Beltre's 3 home runs in Game 4, the Rangers ousted the Rays in the ALDS, before eliminating the Tigers in the ALCS, with Beltre's RBI single off Max Scherzer giving them the lead in the decisive Game 6. Beltre's first World Series was a classic 7-game affair between the Rangers and the St. Louis Cardinals. After swatting 4 hits in Game 3, Beltre came to the plate against Chris Carpenter with his team down 2-1 in the 6th inning of Game 5. On an 0-1 curveball from Carpenter, Beltre went down to one knee and launched perhaps the biggest home run in Rangers history, tying the score and igniting the Rangers' come-from-behind 4-2 victory. The Cards won the next 2 games and the title in dramatic fashion, but Beltre had left a lasting impact on the series and on Texas fans overall. In 2012, the slugging third baseman picked up right where he left off, belting 36 home runs to go along with his second highest career OPS at 921. He was again an All-Star starter and a Gold Glove winner, finishing 3rd in AL MVP voting. The Rangers made the playoffs again, but lost to the Orioles in the wildcard game. It was also during these first few years in the Lone Star State that Beltre became an MLB fan favorite and a social media phenomenon, with his personality quirks and antics on the field giving rise to many viral moments. He threw his glove at balls roped past him down the line. He swung so hard sometimes he knocked off his own helmet or spun himself around like a pretzel. Once, after an umpire asked him to stand on the on-deck circle, Beltre dragged the mat to where he had been standing, immediately earning a hilarious ejection. He flipped foul balls at third base coaches, ran into the outfield to avoid tags, and engaged in standoffs at third base. There was seemingly no end to his playful spirit. What's more, Beltre's rapport with teammate Elvis Andrus led to a number of chuckle-worthy clips, especially when Andrus tried to touch his head, which, for some reason, was a special irritation to him. "I've never liked people touching my head," Beltre once explained, "not even my kids." Over the next 4 seasons in Texas, from 2013 to 2016, Beltre would continue to excel production-wise, averaging 25 home runs and OPS plus marks north of 125, leading all third basemen in both hits and average, while racking up another All-Star appearance and Gold Glove. In 2015, he became only the 5th third baseman in history to hit 400 home runs, and then in 2017, he accomplished 3 more insane milestones: 600 career doubles, 5,000 career stolen bases, and 3,000 career hits, becoming the first Dominican-born player to break into the 3K club. Beltre hit just .273 with 15 home runs and a 99 OPS plus in 2018, and after the season announced his retirement after 21 years in the bigs. He'll be on the Hall of Fame ballot for the first time in 2024, at which point he should immediately be elected. So, what made Adrian Beltre so special? Well, let's start with his elite and consistent work with the glove. Defense is notoriously hard to measure, and more exact measurements like defensive WAR and DRS have only been been in use for the past 2 decades, making it even more difficult to get reliable data. But nonetheless, both of these numbers paint him very favorably. Beltre is amongst the career leaders in both. Baseball Reference credits him with a career defensive WAR of 23.1 at third base, which is second only to Brooks Robinson's 39.1, which is based on much more extrapolation than Adrian's due to the time in which Robinson played. As for DRS, since they began tracking that in 2003, Beltre's career total of 222 ranks as the highest mark, not just among third basemen, but any position. And for context, that's almost 400 more than current Hall of Famer Derek Jeter. Those numbers reflect Beltre's ability to make every kind of play at third base, from using his soft hands to field balls in the hole or down the line, or his bare hand to charge in on bunts. They also reflect one of Beltre's true superpowers, his arm. Beltre made 29 errors in his first full season, and he blamed his arm for most of them, so he made an adjustment, adopting a somewhat unorthodox throwing style in which he tried to plant both feet on the ground before whipping the ball over to first base nearly sidearm style. It worked wonders. His throwing accuracy improved and his errors went down. Beltre's manager in Texas, Ron Washington, a former big league infielder, once said, "You wouldn't teach Beltre's style of play, but he's pretty dang good." Beltre also distinguished himself at the plate, becoming a truly elite hitter in his 30s, managing to pair some dominant seasons with his ability to consistently rack up counting stats. Part of it came with experience. He could always hit any pitch in any location and any count, but over time he achieved elite pitch recognition skills and became an excellent two-strike hitter. He also hit nearly 500 home runs despite spending large chunks of his career in 2 pitcher-friendly ballparks in Los Angeles and Seattle. In fact, Beltre finished his career with more hits, home runs, and RBI on the road than he had at home, a rare feat for a hitter. Another overlooked aspect of what made Beltre great was his mental toughness and resilience. He was a fierce competitor, every pitch of every at-bat. He overcame adversity after adversity to stay starting at the hot corner, and he showed incredible tenacity by coming back from not 1, but 2 career lulls. How many players can pull that off? But it's not just the stats and longevity that made Adrian Beltre so special, it was the joy with which he played the game. Beltre's enormous heart and unpredictable eccentricities made him an easy player to love for fans across the country. His playfulness with teammates like Elvis Andrus was also endearing. Anytime a pop-up was hit between the 2 players, it felt like anything could happen, including Beltre pretending to catch the ball as if it should have been his all along. Sometimes he would look genuinely angry with Andrus, but you never knew if he was or if he was just joking around. Beltre's flamboyant, good-hearted feuds with opposing players like Felix Hernandez and Miguel Cabrera also made for hugely entertaining viewing. He truly was one of the most good-natured and fun-loving players we've seen in baseball in a long time. Adrian Beltre's career numbers are some of the best that have ever been tallied, especially for a third sacker. 3,166 hits, 477 home runs, 1,707 RBIs, 636 doubles, 222 defensive runs saved, 5 Gold Gloves, and a career WAR of 93.5. And what's crazier, among third basemen, Beltre ranks first in RBIs and hits, and is third behind only Mike Schmidt and Eddie Matthews in home runs and career WAR. Only Brooks Robinson appeared in more games at the hot corner. Add to these numbers an indomitable personality that was truly one of a kind, and you can see why we at MTC believe we can confidently say there will never be another Adrian Beltre.
In 1969, Lou Brock was on a streak of 33 steals in a row without getting caught, until he faced a young catcher with the Reds from Binger, Oklahoma. Johnny Bench was currently in the process of revolutionizing the catching position, making aggressive throws to all bases in ways other catchers just didn't, or couldn't at the time. Brock took off running. Bench popped up and uncorked a throw that beat Brock so badly that Brock didn't even slide. After the game, Bench was undressing, ready to toss his uniform into a cart, when he noticed it was being pushed by Lou Brock himself. "Just make it close next time," the great base stealer told Bench. Back then, opposing players didn't visit the other team's locker room, but Johnny Bench changed the way baseball was played. His was a special circumstance. He's probably the greatest all-around catcher in MLB history, with highlights that are certainly unrivaled. Sure, Mike Piazza hit more homers as a catcher, but he won 0 Gold Gloves. Pudge Rodriguez won 13 of those, but he only hit over 30 homers or drove in more than 100 runs once in his career. Bench did that 4 times. Catching equipment is called the tools of ignorance because catchers take a beating during the season and no right-thinking person would pursue being that much of a human punching bag. With that being said, there was nothing ignorant about Johnny Bench. The list of accomplishments is long, besides what I've already said. Bench was the first catcher to win NL Rookie of the Year. He was a 2-time MVP winner by the time he was 24 years old. He caught over 100 games for 13 straight seasons. In 1974, he became the first catcher to ever lead the NL in total bases. In 1970, he led the league in homers with 40 and in caught stealing percentage with a mind-boggling 56.4%. He was at one time the best power hitter in the game, and at the same time was so good a defensive catcher that he probably could have hit 220 and still been incredibly valuable. There's no catcher today who commands the respect and awe that Johnny Bench did in his prime, and due to the evolution of the position, there seems very little chance his legacy will ever be rivaled. But before we get into one of the best primes Major League Baseball has ever seen, we have to go back to the beginning, when Johnny was just a young kid out of a small town in Oklahoma. Johnny Bench's upbringing was unconventional by superstar athlete standards. Instead of training with the best coaches from a young age, Bench was picking cotton. And not just picking it, but hoisting bags that weighed upwards of 80 pounds onto trucks. He picked peanuts, painted water towers, delivered newspapers, and before he was 16, he was driving his father's truck. Bench attributes his eventual raw strength to how he was raised. He was the quintessential strong country boy. His father had wanted to be a ball player, but World War II had interrupted that plan. Bench became a catcher because his father said that every team needed one, but until 9th grade, Bench stood a measly 5 foot 2 inches. When he told his teachers in Binger, Oklahoma that he was going to play in the big leagues one day, they had to try not to laugh. Bench had seen Mickey Mantle play on TV and was shocked to learn that Mantle hailed from Commerce, Oklahoma. Apparently, he had wondered aloud, guys from Oklahoma can play in the majors? Until then, he'd probably had no idea that it was even possible. Then, it became his dream. But how could someone that small ever make it to the big leagues? Lucky for him, he grew 9 inches by the time he was a junior, and by then, no one was chuckling at his chances. He could hold 7 baseballs in one hand after all. He could stand at home plate and launch a ball over the left field fence. Bench was a standout basketball player in high school as well, even making All-State. He had plans to play both sports in college at Phillips University in Enid, but 2 things happened during his senior year that changed Bench's life forever. The first was nearly getting killed. Coming back from an away game, the brakes in the other team's bus went out and the accident killed 2 of Bench's teammates. Bench had heard his father say that the safest place in a car wreck was on the floorboards, so Bench grabbed a teammate and fell to the floor. He was spared. Still, the impact of seeing his friends die like that showed young Johnny that life was precious, and to never take anything for granted. The second major event was getting drafted in the second round of MLB's first draft, in 1965, by the Cincinnati Reds. His signing bonus of $6,000 seemed way too low, according to his father, but Bench understood what his goal was, and signed anyway. In August 1967, a 19-year-old Bench was playing for AAA Buffalo when he got the call that he was headed to the show. He was set to be the second youngest player in MLB. Still, he was no pushover behind the plate. He was a kid that told pitchers what to throw with gusto. At first, some of the veterans on any team he played on resisted, but they usually gave in fairly quickly when they realized that, despite his young age, he was usually right. Right from the beginning, he was an excellent game caller. During his 26-game cup of coffee in 1967, he hit just 1 homer with an abysmal average of 163, but the next year he came to camp ready to take his rightful place behind the plate permanently. During spring training, he got to meet Ted Williams and Mickey Mantle for the first time, and later that season, he was named to the All-Star team. In the clubhouse before the game, Willie Mays came over and told Bench he should be starting. It was already obvious to people in baseball that Bench had the potential to be the game's best catcher. It was in that 1968 season that he became the first backstop to win NL Rookie of the Year, setting a then rookie record for catchers with 15 dingers while driving in 82 and hitting 275. All of this coming during the year of the pitcher, when the league as a whole hit just 237. With no interleague play, Bench had to face pitchers like Bob Gibson, Don Drysdale, and Tom Seaver a ton, yet he more than held his own. He also caught a gargantuan 154 games that season, an insane number for any catcher, let alone one in his first campaign. Manager Sparky Anderson said of his competition, "Don't embarrass nobody by comparing them to Johnny Bench." But Johnny was just getting started. During spring training in 1969, he did something that seems straight out of myth. Apparently, Bench was catching a soft-tossing lefty named Gary Arrigo, and during one of his outings, his fastball seemed to have even less zip than usual. Bench demanded more, and when he didn't get it, he threw down his mitt and caught Arrigo barehanded. I do want to note here that some versions of the story have the pitcher being Jim Maloney, but regardless, it would still be just as insane if it indeed is true. Now, about that mitt he allegedly tossed down. It was actually hinged, not a big flat saucer like catchers normally used at the time. Bench was also the first to wear his batting helmet backwards, along with a mask for greater protection. Another innovation he came up with was keeping his throwing hand behind his back, since he'd already broken his thumb a few times off of foul balls. Both moves were revolutionary at the time, and many questioned Bench for using these new techniques. Whatever his critics may have thought, they couldn't deny that by 1970, Bench was among the most valuable position players in the game. It's hard to convey just how impressive Bench was in winning his first MVP. He led the majors in homers with 45 and in RBIs with an ungodly 148. Bench also won a Gold Glove, becoming seen as even more of a game-calling expert while also throwing out 48.4% of all base runners who tried to steal. In one game against the Cardinals, Bench hit 3 homers, all off of Hall of Famer Steve Carlton. For his career, Bench took Carlton deep 12 times. But even more than perhaps all of this, he became the anchor of a team that would easily march to the World Series, before Brooks Robinson would turn in one of the greatest fielding exhibitions in the history of the game, helping the O's take care of the Reds in just 5 contests. Baltimore's vaunted pitching staff held Bench to just a .211 average with a single homer and 3 RBIs. But this would be just the start of the Big Red Machine era in Cincy. That offseason saw Bench rise to another level of celebrity. He went to Vietnam with Bob Hope and the USO, played golf with Arnold Palmer, was a regular on talk shows, had a cameo on Mission Impossible, and even began hosting his own weekly television show in Cincinnati. As Bench later said, "My push for visibility that offseason, even at age 22, was intentional." A bachelor, Bench was an admitted playboy who got around. Perhaps this, coupled with his busy offseason socializing instead of training, helped contribute to a 1971 season that displayed an outright freefall in his production, as Bench slid to an average of just .237 with a lackluster, in comparison, 27 home runs, good for a barely above average OPS plus of just 107. That juggernaut of a squad from the year before finished 4th in the league, and there was a growing chorus of boos heard at Riverfront Stadium as the season dragged on. However, it wouldn't take long for the cheers to return. In 1972, Bench returned to form in a big way, claiming his second MVP trophy by again leading the majors in homers with 40 and RBIs with 125. He also led the majors in sac flies and intentional walks. That year's percentage of runners thrown out also managed to eclipse an otherworldly 55%. Obviously, he won another Gold Glove. In that year's NLCS, Game 5 saw the Reds heading into the 9th inning down 3-2 and in danger of going home. Back then, the NLCS was just a 5-game series. One mighty swing, Bench tied the score with a homer, and the Reds ended up scratching out a run to walk off a trip to the World Series. The season wouldn't have a happy ending for Bench, however, as the Reds lost in 7 to a mighty Oakland A's team that would run off a three-peat from here. It was a memorable World Series with Hall of Famers and a prime Pete Rose all over the field, and 6 games decided by a single run. It also included Joe Rudy's famous catch, Joe Morgan's throw, and Johnny Bench getting fanned on an intentional walk. Nevertheless, he had still posted a respectable OPS that series of .828. In the 1972 offseason, Bench had had surgery to remove a benign lump from his lungs, but he managed to recover in time to lead the 1973 Reds again into the postseason with a 99-win campaign. While he did manage to drive in 100 runs, his power numbers overall were down, with just 25 homers and a 119 OPS+. But in Game 1 of the NLCS against the Yogi Berra-led You Gotta Believe Mets, Bench hit a walk-off homer in the bottom of the 9th against Tom Seaver. Reds fans wouldn't be able to go home happy, however, as they ended up seeing yet another good-looking squad go down in 5 games, punctuated with a brawl between Rose and Bud Harrelson. In 1974, Bench came out like he had something to prove, and put up yet another all-time stellar season, leading the majors with 129 RBIs and 315 total bases, the first time a catcher had ever done that. The team, though, despite winning 98 games and having the second best record in baseball, didn't make the postseason, falling to the Dodgers in the race for the NL West. The Big Red Machine took all of that negative energy, losses to the O's, the A's, the Mets, and channeled it into a juggernaut of epic proportions over the next 2 seasons. 1975, 108 wins. 1976, 102. They won 2 rings in the process and went a combined 14-3 in the 2 postseasons. And, of course, Johnny Bench was in the midst of it all, in more ways than one. Always an eligible bachelor who liked to date beauty queens, Bench proposed to his first wife, a former Miss South Carolina, after just 4 dates, and was married 7 weeks later. But by the end of 1975, Bench was getting divorced, battling a shoulder injury, and fighting off a bad case of the flu. In the legendary 1975 World Series, which the Reds won in 7 games, Bench hit just 1 homer and batted .207. The regular season of 75 was still a great year for the backstop, but it certainly wasn't dominant in the same way as he had been at one time. 1976 would represent a tale of 2 seasons almost. The regular season, in which Bench had arguably his worst offensive year to date, with just 16 homers, a career-low .394 slug, and his second worst full-season WAR of 4.6. But during the campaign, Bench had went back to being single, and by the time the postseason came around, he was dialed in, OPSing over 1,300 with 3 homers as the Reds went 7-0 to sweep the Phillies and then the Yankees. Bench also contributed with his iconic arm, throwing out one of the fastest runners in that series versus New York in Mickey Rivers. After that came a deluge of products. Johnny Bench, batter up, seemed to be on every little league field in the country. His Krylon paint ads got stuck in people's heads for decades. As Bench later explained, "I sold myself from here to Timbuktu. A museum in Bingor houses many of the items that Bench hawked over the years." It is undoubtable, however, that the peak of Bench's career by this point was largely over. Between 1977 and 1983, Johnny Bench would appear in just one more postseason, in 1979. However, the team that won the NL West that year wasn't the Big Red Machine any longer. Gone were Tony Perez, Joe Morgan, and Pete Rose. Bench's last truly great year as a full-time catcher was in 1977, when he batted .375 with 31 homers and 109 RBIs. He also won his 10th straight Gold Glove. which would prove to be his last. He never again hit 30 homers or drove in 100 runs, but in the offseason, he did sign a 5-year contract that would pay him $400,000 per year. A hefty sum at the time, though Bench probably could have made more if he had left the Reds for greener pastures. It was at this point the aches and pains of catching, of being in a serious car wreck in his youth, of working hard as a child, began to take its toll on Bench's body. During the course of his career, he broke 6 bones in each foot, broke a thumb twice, and towards the end of his career had constant nagging pain in his shoulders and back. After retiring, he'd have to have both of his hips replaced. Bench was a smart and serious student of the game and understood what was at stake. Are there times I wish I hadn't caught? Sure, but then I wouldn't have been Johnny Bench. Athletes referring to themselves in the third person can grate the eardrums, but in the case of Johnny Bench, it made sense, because he truly did understand he existed as a commodity and as a real person. The real person felt his body wearing down, but the commodity was almost synonymous with baseball. Even before his 30th birthday, MLB historians were calling Bench the greatest catcher in MLB history. Bill James, in his very first self-published baseball abstract, showed why Johnny Bench was the best. For the first time, statistical analysis was applied to simulate a 162-game schedule, and James found that Bench was one of only a handful of current players to average over 30 homers per 162 games. The rest of the list is a fearsome collection of sluggers, but none of which were catchers. That list says pretty much everything about Bench. One of the greatest power hitters in the game was also one of its best defensive catchers in history, a combo that has never really been rivaled since. As I addressed in the intro, 1980 was the last season that Bench caught full time, and in the process he still managed to smack a healthy 24 homers with an 810 OPS. But after the dismal strike-shortened 1981 season, Bench's body forced him to give up catching completely, and become a fairly terrible fielding third and first baseman on some horrendous Reds teams that were an insanely far cry from the former glory of the Big Red Machine. But even as he entered his final season in 1983, Bench could still provide fireworks. He had the obligatory farewell send-off at various stadiums around the National League, and then came his own Johnny Bench Day at Riverfront Stadium. It was there that in front of 53,790 screaming fans, Bench homered for the 389th and final time in his career. If that wasn't enough, 12 days later, in his final career AB, Bench was sent up to pinch hit and delivered a 2 RBI single. A pinch runner came in for him, and that was that. The greatest catcher in MLB history had officially called it quits. As I mentioned earlier, it's hard to put into words just how good a prime Johnny Bench was. For example, as great as Buster Posey managed to be in his career, he only blasted over 20 homers in a season twice. Johnny did it 11 times. Joe Mauer won 3 batting titles, but was done catching after just over 900 games, in contrast to Bench's 1,700. Piazza was undoubtedly a better pure hitter, but had defensive hangups. Pudge, for all of his own insane accomplishments, finished over 6 B-WAR behind Bench's all-time high total of 75.1, despite playing in significantly more games. In fact, Bench's average of 5.6 WAR per 162 games is also the highest total in MLB history for backstops. When all was said and done, the kid from Oklahoma had left behind a legacy currently unrivaled, as the best catcher in the history of Major League Baseball. And, frankly, there's few that can even claim to be in the same league. All of this, and so much more than we could ever hope to put into one video, is why I believe there will never be another Johnny Bench. Now, thank you for watching. If you enjoyed today's video, remember to like and subscribe, and consider checking out this playlist for more essay content just like this. Have a great rest of your day, everyone.